to unidirectional flow. It's not this fighting for state kind of thing. So like for the most part, what I'm saying is that pattern, he basically tried to find the most contrived example of a specific API that he could to make it do that. And it doesn't, like, you just don't, no one does that anymore. I don't think. Yes, exactly. And Svelte's derived being writable, I believe, again, works the way that I am talking about. This kind of writable computed, no one, like, as I said, I wrote a lot of the modern stuff. You guys have been following my stream. I wrote about this, and wrote about this stuff online about 5 years ago, right? About how I would approach the problem. And in the meantime, Solid hasn't kept up. I was working on Solid Start, but other frameworks and solutions actually implemented the stuff that I talked about. And so they're not this. You know what I mean? Like where's the problem with this is this is literally writing to these things. Like even in Knockout, the correct way to do this is not this. The correct way to do this is to actually make an independent state variable. And I used to put it sub observable on the computed and then have that kind of write back in both ways. Like this is just terrible, honestly. Like look what it does. It basically formats down, combines these two together, and then when you write it, it tries to parse and split and write to both of them. The funniest thing is, I bet you, even with this API, and probably this is where Vue gets by, you don't have to experience what he experienced in Knockout today. Like this is just not a thing at all anymore. But he has a valid point for the time period. Yeah, this wasn't contrived in 2010. No, I think so. Just pointing out that this thing isn't like, if this is his only argument against implicit tracking, it doesn't say so much. Basically, his first argument was that we should auto track, and I think everyone here got it. This one is like, we shouldn't. The lesson from this one is we shouldn't synchronously like write back like in a compute. Like this is basically like writing to state in an effect. That's kind of like his argument. Except, yeah, he basically said don't use effect to write state. This actually, that's what we saw earlier. This is Aiden's picture, right? Even back then we knew don't write the state and use effect. That's essentially what you're seeing right here.
Anyway, on to Angular. So I covered KVO both in its explicit form, where you list out the dependencies, which has a lot of very easy to understand bugs, and implicit KVO, where you can still see these problems with data flow and arguing over who is the source of truth. The third approach, which I think is better than the KVO approach, is this thing called dirty checking, which was popularized by Angular a couple years ago. And this is, again, I'm a great designer. This is a very common unit on Facebook, believe it or not, where you put a profile picture next to somebody's name. And we put those everywhere. So let's make a reusable component for that in Angular and see how it works. So we start by creating this thing called we basically use this thing called a directive. So FB avatar is that component. In Angular, it's called a directive. And we say, hey, create this FB avatar and use the current user that my controller is providing. Does this make sense? I don't blame you if it doesn't, because it's Angular. No, but so I'll get into how the scoping stuff works. But basically, this user equals user thing refers to a variable in the scope that controller provides. And it'll make sure this avatar is kept up to date always. So the way that we do this is, in Angular, we create a new module. We create a controller on that module, my controller.
There's the $scope I was talking about, where the controller is a singleton, and then they have to inject the temporal, the local
and
scope.
This $scope thing is where those variables are looked up. And so we initialize the user variable on the scope to be my user object. You could imagine this being fetched from the server somewhere, sent down to some payload. And then we want to actually render this data structure. So we say, okay, create this directive called FB avatar, and this is our specification for how it should be rendered. So I don't actually know what restrict E means. I think it means restricted to an element. You can only use it as an element, but that's an implementation detail. But the point is that this says, hey, render this template and then make sure that the user always updates when the value on the scope updates. So that's where that user equal sign thing means. And we're also using this FB pick directive that we can also define. So we can use composition here, where we say, okay, I want a reusable profile pick component that we might use in a different UI. So there's like face piles in Facebook. And then we want to reuse it in this other media object. Now the problem here is that we can't actually use our existing JavaScript tools to understand this. So if anybody's ever used a linter before, like JS hint, it doesn't understand what these strings do. These are just opaque strings. So if you want to know whether you're using a directive that hasn't been defined, you're SOL. You've got to run it, and you got to hope that you hit that code path. And it's really, really difficult. Also, if you want to get a stack trace, if this directive throws an exception and you want to see what other directive was creating it, it's very difficult to get that as well. That's because we're rebuilding a lot of JavaScript in order to use dirty checking. And what dirty checking does is it just goes over everything in scope and checks, hey, is the previous version equal to the next version? And so you have to pass everything through this scope, and you have to use directives in order to build your application, not functions. The point is that you can't build applications with these. It's that there must be a simpler way. And the Angular and Ember and Knockout folks focus a lot on developer ergonomics and making things work as well as they can. But I just think that they're built on some fundamentally worse ideas. You might be thinking web components right now. I am kind of coming around to the idea a little bit. There's a lot of stuff in the web component spec that is nice, being able to customize how selects work, for example, like dropdowns. So there's a lot of great stuff in web components, but it's not going to be.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he didn't really. I mean, he was talking about scope. He was talking. His argument was the fact that like basically there's this like giant shared scope that's kind of like all wooing in, but he didn't really. There was no broken example here. The way he detracts against Angular is sort of the way we detract against React. Do you know what I mean? Where he's like the templating is part of it, but he's like basically saying like, look, we're kind of like you're doing this thing, and then it just all kind of jams together, and then the whole thing kind of just like reruns, like that's the kind of impression I got from him. In the same way we kind of go, React can kind of just hit the state and the whole component reruns. Like it's that kind of thing. And he was arguing about the linter and the strings, but like it's funny because tooling now has caught up, so that they actually have pretty good templating processes on compilers and on strings and whatnot. He's not wearing a bathrobe, so I disregard his argument. It's kind of funny that people Svelte really. I called Svelte templates string templates at one point, and Rich got really offended, and I think it's because of this kind of mentality. I honestly was like, it's just when you inject a different language that isn't JavaScript as a top level scope, I call it a string template. Apparently that has negative connotations because of this kind of thing, but I don't know. Anyway, let's keep on going. What does he say about web components? I'm not going to watch the whole video. We're almost to where I wanted to stop.
The way that you structure your application. And that's what React tries to solve, is how do you structure your application to manipulate the DOM. Web components is kind of more of the same regular DOM API. So I kind of think of it as standardized worst practices. It's kind of a bummer. What if we had a reactive JavaScript though? Remember, we talked about.
Yeah, Dev. So basically, if you watch this talk, auto-track dependencies, don't synchronize state, don't write template strings. This is a talk recipe for Solid.js. Yes. Pretty much. Right. But it's also React. Kind of. No, I mean, if you view old React as basically auto-tracking all possible dependencies, it's also React. Hooks came about because they needed actual control and composition and performance, and that basically threw one out the window. So, but yes, I think you're getting to the point. Pete Hunt would be a huge fan of Solid.js. He's not, but just throwing that out there.
Like a polyfill for reactive JavaScript in the DOM. So let's look at this example again. Remember this? The most voted companies at the top, and then the percentage of the votes that are upvotes. Now, we had to hack around this and create all these observables or pass things through scope in order to get this automatic updating, right? Otherwise, in JavaScript, if you update a variable, all of its dependencies aren't automatically recomputed, right? Because program flow goes from top to bottom. But imagine that they were. So we could write our JavaScript like this. We have the same stuff at the bottom, basically. We get our total number of votes. Computer prop. One unordered list that shows the title and then the percentage of votes that are upvotes.
This is really cool the way he wrote this code, by the way. Because immediately, see, he's leaning into the fact that he's using a virtual DOM right off the bat. Like he's like, look, what if we can just say that UList has a class name, has this ability to sort a list, take the first three, and then map them to DOM elements. Yeah, basically, yeah, React is just JavaScript.
This is all just regular JavaScript. There's no framework involved here. We have some helper functions to create the elements, but other than that, this is plain old JavaScript. You know, slice, map, summing stuff. Like it's all pretty basic stuff. And what's great about that is that since JavaScript is, like, by some definition, a real programming language, you can actually use regular techniques for abstracting stuff, right? Like you don't have to create these directives, and you don't have to create observable and computed properties. You can just say, oh, that expression in there looks like pretty ugly. I want to pull it out into a function. And you just do it like that. You know how functions work?
The funniest thing about this is, like, I mean, he does a great job of bearing the lead here, is that if the Ember example was written implicit with knockout at the beginning, and he was doing his work here, the knockout version is more efficient than what he's doing. And I don't think it's any more or less code, but let's keep on going.
What's also pretty cool is that we could unit test this separately too. Imagine that this is like this big complex piece of UI, possibly reused in multiple parts of the code base. You want the team that owns that reusable piece to be able to test that separately from all the places where it's used. Again, if you can't think about individual pieces separated from each other, then that's more stuff you have to load in your brain, and that's not simple.
Yeah. This is an argument, to be fair, of why not to pass signals as props, because then you have to be aware of whether they're signals or not. But React had something very right there, that if you treat all inputs as reactive or possibly reactive, then the decoupling thing is real. And this is a principle that I took on with Solid, right? People complain about the prop destructuring, but if you go, look, any prop can be reactive, you can't destructure, and you just take that as a rule, then you're basically safe. Like I know it's something you have to jump into at first, but what it means is ultimately things will just work in the same argument that he's making for React here.
So we can't do this today because JavaScript is not reactive. And more importantly, the DOM is stateful. So the way that you interact with the DOM is you say, hey, I want to set the text of this element to this, or I want to change this color over here, and then it sticks. And then if you make another change to the DOM, that change that you made previously is still there. And this is just like that buddy list example I gave earlier, where you've got all of these events going, and you're thinking about all this mutation over time, and it's very difficult for you to predict what does the whole page look like at a given point in time. So rather than deal with the stateful DOM, the React team created something called the virtual DOM, which we like to think of it as a less leaky polyfill for reactive JavaScript in the DOM.
Less leaky.
And it's used in a lot of places. I actually have these slides left over from before React was like super popular. But it's used in our search product, our insights product. It renders these charts, G and VML. But now I can say it actually like rendered well. And the best part is, and it will get live updating data and it will render it for you. And remember, there's no data binding artifacts here. I'm just simply expressing the logic of my application. So how does this work? And so the model we like is whenever any piece of data in your application may have changed, re-render everything. Now, that sounds crazy and it sounds like kind of annoying, but it's actually really, really nice, right? We're not thinking about like the buddy list. We're not thinking about event A, B, C, and D over time. We're just taking a snapshot of the data model and then we're re-rendering everything in one pass. So you can just fit all of that stuff in your head without thinking about the entire history of what your application's done. And so what React does is React re-renders everything to a virtual DOM representation, which is fast. And then it diffs that representation with a previous representation, which is fast. And then it only updates the DOM with what actually changed. So for example, if you render a div with a class name and that class name attribute changes, React will figure out, hey, that div is still there, so don't recreate the element, just change the class name property to be what the user wanted it to be. And this leads to like the ability to build really expressive applications. So this is some definition of expressive power, but I like this one better. It's called practical expressivity, which is the measure of ideas expressible concisely and readily in a language.
He is right that the power of using JavaScript exceeds the power of templates, but ironically, sometimes the ability to limit actually gives more power because of constraints setting limitations, which means that things have to work a certain way. And by doing so, you can actually make other assumptions that are actually more impactful. I to be fair, I'm not saying either way or is better in this case. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
So how much typing does it take to express something? How much stuff do you have to put in your head? And so if you think about all the examples for where we did data binding versus the ones where we used React or the virtual DOM, we had to fit a lot more. We had to type a lot more code and put a lot more in our head. But the reason why people tolerate this low expressive power of data binding systems is because they think that re-rendering and diffing is prohibitively expensive. This is why this has never been done before. Because people think you can't re-render the whole application. They think that's going to take a while. And then they think walking through every single thing that you re-rendered and checking what changed is also going to be expensive. So nobody tried it. They just tried to track, what is the underlying change in my data model and then propagate that through to the DOM with those computed properties or dirty checking that skill. This is a great quote. Every system has constraints, specifically around cost. So like I said, KVO entangles your application code with observables. You got to think about how your data is being kept up to date when you're doing KVO. Angular style dirty checking means you're not allowed to use functions anymore to build your application. You have to use directives. And the virtual DOM also has constraints as well. It's not perfect. It needs a signal to say something may have changed in your application. That's it. This could be object.observe. This could be any event. The signal that React uses, if anybody's used it before, is called setState. It's a method that you call when something has changed in your application. Now, the key thing to think about with this, is that KVO, your observables are entangled inside your application. So when you're building your application, you're always thinking about it. With Angular, scope is always throughout your application. With Virtual DOM, this signal's at the edge of your application. You build most of your application not worrying about it, and then at the very edge, you have the signal that says, hey, something changed. So this is why we built React, is to get these properties. But we also had the opportunity, because we're just kind of building a system based on JavaScript, we had the opportunity to do it right from the beginning. So we were able to avoid domain-specific languages when we were building this.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that when you introduce domain-specific languages, so these would be like the magic HTML attributes to inform data binding, composing things with strings.
I think you guys get the idea. I think we heard it enough. Yeah. Yeah, I my gut feeling is this. Let's look. I think it's around 2015 because he's not at Facebook anymore. February 2015. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys get the idea. I just wanted to. Yeah, Dalton playing JSX a lot here. Yeah. I mean, maybe he never quite liked JSX. But yeah, I mean, you get the thing. It's interesting because he has a lot of reasonably good points. But like this turned into these kind of topics turned into something that got very far from where it started. And I'd say the most ironic part to me, at least, is that this talk is very poignant place to say that like maybe React hooks weren't the best design. I'm just he basically, I feel like he could have used his like explicit dependency tracking Ember example there. Obviously, we didn't need to go all the way deep in here. I just wanted to kind of, I think it's people nowadays don't have enough appreciation for these old talks. I don't know why I haven't upvoted this one. It's just like this is kind of the basis of what our stuff was built on. Okay. So, anyways, let's just. I'm ready to move on from here. Let's get back to sharing the screen, whole screen. Let's go here. Entire screen. This one. I do that other share screen so that I can get audio. Anyway. It's a cool talk. If you want to watch the rest, you can, but you get the gist of it. Let's continue on with where I wanted to go from here. Yeah. OP10. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see how we've kind of gone almost full circle. People are expecting their data to be special now that, like, basically after this talk, 3 years later, everyone's using a syntax that resembles KVO, right? Like, so whether he likes this or not, there's something in people's minds that kind of led them back there. Of course, we have that whole, where's my bookmarks? We have this whole example. This is always a risk when you build stuff this way. Just people shouldn't do this. This was his argument against knockout, essentially. In any case, it's a classic. More people should check out that kind of content. We might cover some more in the future. It's very interesting to see the difference of where we've been and where we're going to. Okay. All right. What is next? I wanted to shift gears here because originally I was going to talk about atoms versus signals a little bit later. There's one other topic I wanted to kind of like slide in here very quick for my bookmarks, and I do think it's interesting a little bit to at least talk about it because and it came out in Pete's video when he was talking about the difference between viewing systems as events versus viewing systems as like the synchronized state. And the ironic thing is signals became that synchronized state thing. Like the early days, they were basically events, which is a fair argument from his standpoint. But when they became these push-pull systems that we have today, they're lossy, you lose notifications, but they synchronize. Basically, you got the same guarantees you got with React in a more granular manner. So like, it's interesting to watch what's been going on in the Angular community a little bit because there's been like they've been building this stuff on basically events feeding into their dirty checking for ages, and then signals are coming in and people are feeling a bit of displacement here. Quick reminder, RxJS can do everything signals can. Signals can't do everything RxJS can. This doesn't mean that I'm saying you shouldn't use signals. Be smart about the ratio. Just sanity check, since many devs want to eradicate Rx 100% for no reason. Which is kind of funny. Sorry, there's a comment. What is Angular Bros? It's a podcast. I've actually been on this podcast. Yeah. I disagree with this kind of like they're just different things. We've already talked about how signals are different than atoms. Signals are different than observables in that observables are event systems, signals are a state system. So they cover different things. We've probably talked about this in the past. It came up again, and I just thought that it was funny because I've actually built event systems on top of signals, and I've tried to build signals on top of event systems. Like I used the TC39 observable Spectre originally built solid signals, and then realized it was not a good fit because I needed to add back all those guarantees. In a sense, Rx has subjects, which are, basic value carriers, but they don't have graph dependency guarantees. They can't guarantee stuff propagates synchronously or only once, right? So you basically, the value of using Rx observables at the base or signals is almost nothing, because basically all the code that matters is actually the code that's not there. And similarly, I had Rx stuff in, I made Solid Rx years ago, back when I used to notify always on change in my memos. But like the whole point of signals is not to always notify. Be like, look, the value hasn't changed. We care about stabilization, not about discrete events. So like there's ways to force the values through. You can always return a different object. You can say equals false, or there's ways to force it, but then you have to make sure it goes through your whole tree. So events make sense. I agree actually with Pete Hunt from that talk, because essentially the way you should be thinking about things is events exist at the outside of your system, and they come in, and then they trigger things, and they're also great leaving the system. When someone interacts with the UI and they or do something, like some kind of calculation happens, and then you have to like log something out. It's like an effect. It's leaving your system. And sometimes it's not the polling that you want, where you want the event, where it's like stabilized, like the way signals work. It's actually every time this happens, you want this to propagate through. Like you definitely you don't want it to lose. Signals can lose events being fired because they literally don't care. They only care about the snapshot. In a lot of ways, signal systems like React essentially. Like React is just like it's like if your app had like one signal instead of like hundreds of them, right? So like it fits in the same zone. You can actually apply that thinking here, which is interesting because how many people use RxJS and React? I mean, yeah, I said they're fighting each other. The whole argument here was like, we're here because when building UIs, something like 90% of the problems are state synchronization, and like 10% maybe are event transformations. Most event manipulation is trivial or can happen outside the UI layer. I'm not saying that events are trivial. I'm just saying that a lot of people, their idea of an event is, oh, there was a click handler. Oh, like it's not complicated. Don't get me wrong. It's the Arcs people like look at our elegant drag and drop solution with debouncing. It's like that is a great use for RxJS. But a lot of people, it's literally just like they were using Rx for state synchronization before. That essentially, when you remove all the state synchronization part and you're left with the event part, there's a whole class of apps that literally don't need any RxJS. We shouldn't be suggesting using like one replaces or displaces the other. But even like I had this conversation with the Angular core team. Like they kind of understood this. They were like obviously we don't get rid of RxJS. It just like how much do people generally need RxJS in this world? They change can be event as an end realm experience. Yeah, Redux observable. Yeah, and Redux is one of those things sitting at the edge of your system, right? And it makes sense at the edge. So there's some people arguing against this. The conceptual, but it's not the same thing. Lovely. That's correct. People want to get rid of the replace signals just because. Well, no, it's not just because. It's because they literally don't need RxJS. Yeah, where is it? Signals are just an abstraction of events. No, and I think by the end of this is a kind of interesting conversation with Matthew Phillips. For those who don't know, Matthew Phillips, obviously like Astro core team is CTO of the Astro technology company. Yeah, but he's also one of the maintainers of CanJS for the guys who go deep. That was one of those reactive frameworks back in the day, like back in the knockout days. So like he's familiar enough with like observables from like a signal standpoint that. But the funny thing is, as we go through this conversation, he's basically arguing for events and against signals. So it's funny this is how the conversation started, but it's like because basically signals in some ways do less than events in order to be more use that constraint to be more powerful. So event management gets pretty complicated in running real-time features. I agree. But most people aren't doing that, which would be more common if web dev tools didn't make it so hard. I have an interesting question for Mike, and I know he watches these videos often enough that he might, check it out later. But like, could the problem be why you don't see more real time is because people can't even get past the state synchronization problem? Like, essentially, if you've solved state synchronization, then that opens the door to do more stuff with events. It makes it easier because you're suddenly not worrying about that. People haven't even got past state synchronization. That's why we see less of this stuff. And if you, it's not because these aren't hard problems. It's just people haven't even been able to get up to bat. Yeah, he's tried to build state management on top of it. I mean, there are state there are event-based state systems, and people talk about the the actor pattern and like X state and the state stuff, but like, I mean, all that stuff ends up living on the edge of the system because ultimately the UI, it's like a game. You FPS, you don't need to render every possible frame in the middle. You just need to make sure that at any frame you don't have tearing. So like, That's the job of state synchronization. We get rid of the tearing. These solutions are allowed to exist. It just, on the scale of, from document to app to like video game, I guess, there's not that many people hard on the app side. Has been the argument, and honestly, that's where I've always lived, on the app side. But there's even less people on the video game side. But they do exist. We're seeing more complicated real-time systems and stuff coming in. So yes, each has their place. But when you're talking about in the scope of all Angular devs, yeah, most of you can get rid of your RxJS. Like it's not controversial. Should all of you? Definitely not. Anyway, just short little topic. Let's just keep on going. It seems that Matthew's talking about signals as an architecture rather than as a primitive. Is that how you see it? Yeah. Like, if we go deeper into this, I don't want to go through. The point is more that signals are simplified type event. The simplification comes from hiding the root event from you, but the consequences of signals are lossy. You lose intent. Yeah. As long as your app is purely derivative, this is usually enough. But when you have side effects, it becomes complicated to use so much the usual advice not do side effects of reactive data. Good. The consequences, you have to manage two different types of paradigms in your head, and people struggle to do that. Like, I agree completely with this chain of thought. I just think that the state synchronization problem is hard enough that it's worth introducing a system for it. And in fact, you can view React as one of those types of systems. Like in this context of conversation, all UI frameworks have something more in common than like this event-based things. Like, because this quality that we're talking about is the same in React, same in Solid, same in all the UI frameworks. Let's see. So attempt to move as much into the clean abstraction as possible while ever going distant from the reality outside. Yeah. I think there are two worlds here. It's obvious if you ever try to write a reactive programming language. It's definitely inside and outside the system. It's best to inject the language in the existing language where it isn't even native. React tries to hide this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, ultimately getting into like writable computeds and stuff. Like there's a zone where we can do state writability and we can like get there. But like in general, this is there's a reason why things are structured this way to try to keep things pure and derived. Matthew has had I'm really interested in what he's been thinking in terms of this, because he's kind of at odds with this current declarative thing. He thinks components are kind of a mistake, and he thinks that the current declarative systems basically pushing us into making it about a state synchronization problem is the wrong model. So I think from that perspective, it's interesting. I don't know what the alternative looks like, to be fair, but like by his grouping, something like Solid or React, which in a lot of ways are very different, actually still fall into the same category of bucket. I don't see any different. Like almost every signals framework actually has proxy-based state. Like I'm going to talk about it a bit today. Actually, I've been working like on redesigning parts of our stores. In Solid, they're called stores. In Vue, they're called reactive. It's interesting because they have consequential properties that people don't understand, because they even though they are just made of many immutable cells, by nature they actually become a mutable structure instead of an immutable structure, which has implications. I'm going to get into that in a bit. Right. But it's actually one of the superpowers of fine-grained reactive renderers, because again, when you have proxies and you can have like arrays of objects with properties in them, and you combine it with basically they work like signals, like they have auto tracking to where it's used. You end up in this zone where you can just skip the whole component tree, have the state wherever the hell you want, and without selectors or anything, get perfectly granular updates. I'm actually a big proponent. Proxies are why I created Solid in the first place. I thought people wouldn't be into signals. I'm not going to lie. I made signals the advanced primitive, and I originally create store in Solid was called create state, and I was pitching it as like a replacement for React. Yes, we had function components, not classes. React hooks hadn't come out yet, but I thought everyone would use the object form over the signal form, and then people really got into the signal composition aspect of it, especially after React hooks came out. But yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, do you care when the whole thing changes, or do you care when part of the thing changes? If you care when part of the things change, you should be using stores. Basically, if you're doing collections at all, you should be using stores like models, like where like individual properties can change. If you are doing like more simplistic wiring, controlling singular states, then use signals. Like if, anyway, yeah. So let's keep on going. Yeah, I'm over half my list now, and I'm about 3.5 hours in stream. Okay, I gotta pick up the pace a little bit. Okay. This is the part of the stream where we start talking HackMDs. Before we do this, we can JavaScript. Yeah, it makes diffing easy, and I think that's an important quality of using stores. Okay, so let's. I've been away, but oh god, why is it doing this thing? I got this new mechanical keyboard, and it's so funny because like I'm not one of those guys, you know. I don't care about my Vim keystrokes or whatever. Yeah, it's literally so funny. I got the keyboard specifically for this use case so that I wouldn't have to worry about okay. We're back. So I wouldn't have to worry about this kind of stuff. Let's see here. Oh god, this is what happens when you're away. Sorry, give me a second. All right. Sorry, there's a direct reference here. Okay, sorry, I have to open that on X to actually get to it. I think. Sorry, I'm trying to like copy it, but I'm not in a place where I can actually copy the message. On YouTube, I can't really copy it, and it's actually Twitch's, and they don't let you post links, so it's only Twitch that does. But actually, I've never tried this on X. I thought that it would just show up as a comment here. I've actually haven't played on X in terms of the comment. Huh. How do you chat on X anyways? Like, how do you respond to okay. I see. If I go into the video, got it. Yeah, that's why I prefer arches that are more directly built on events, like model view updated and finite station. Yeah. I mean, this is what I was kind of getting at. He doesn't like components. He doesn't like state synchronization. So like, I love that he says this. I just don't know what it looks like. Model view update is like Elm, right? But like, Hmm. Yeah, I think I talked enough about this kind of zone of things because like this is all fine, but like it's just a different model that, as I said, Signals spoke to me immediately because it was like my FMPGA programming. Uh, this might speak to someone I just haven't seen. Like I guess Elman's the only thing I can think of. Like it's tricky. I get what he's saying in terms of events losing intent, but when it, this is like the opposite of like what Pete Hunt was trying to say, that it's hard to understand events in that thing where he's like, I did this, what's my result? To be fair, you don't have to keep that in your head with a good event system. The event system will handle it for you. But trying to write the logic to consider how events interact with each other can be complicated, which is why things like XState, where you're actually like describing event changes, it's like a sort of meta programming, and like like if to be fair, signals are maybe seen in another meta program. The biggest thing is that they let you, once you're in the graph, like inside reactivity land, you return to a place where even though the graph is technically declarative and it all wires together, you actually get to write your code snippets imperatively, kind of like React. It's just in smaller scopes. So like you get into the zone where most people understand A B, like understand how to write their small pieces that way. It's much harder to try and picture how 15 different places come in and how they interact with each other, right? So like I think this has always been the challenge. Like when you need to find like state machines, you know you need it, but most people that's very difficult starting point. Okay. Okay, so HackMD. I did a little thought experiment a little while ago, and because Nick from he works on a lot of CC39 standard stuff. Ribaldo, I can't remember his name. He's a guy. He's like the maintainer of Babel. Uh, he was like he was telling me that async context was at risk of not getting into the browser. Basically, they pitched it, and then the browsers were like, "Yeah, this is too much work. We don't want it. Like, it's too hard to get it to work in the browser. Do we really need async context or async local storage?" And he was like, "I need help from the community to kind of make the argument." So I wrote a write up for him about that a little while ago. Actually, it's probably in here. So I rough note all my notes. Async context is solid. Yeah. Yeah. Client. I basically wrote this for him so he could use it to make his argument. And I was talking about probably the biggest benefit of async context is the ability to have stack blitz work in the client so that like we can actually simulate the server stuff, because everybody is using async context and server these days with server functions, because you need a way to inject the request consistently. The problem is server functions, in their wonderfully simple API, remove the request object as part of the signature generally, so that they can be transparent with the client. You don't have to do it that way. Different versions of Solid, I've played with different patterns of getting it. It's actually a pain in the ass problem though, because you can't rely on this in case the person doesn't use an arrow function. You can't, like, if you change the arguments, then like it's actually a pain. So I honestly had been like, okay, this kind of sucks. But then obviously Next.js goes in and goes, look, ta-da, you can use like they basically forced every platform to support async local storage, because they were like patch version 13.1 or something. They just decided that like they were going to add it for the runtime. Works fine on Vercel, and they broke Cloudflare, Netlify, basically everyone else in existence. And I was like looking at them and I'm like, man, geez, it would be amazing to have this kind of power. Cause like I debated this API, but I'm like, I can't use async local storage. Even though this would give us the smoothest butter API, I can't use it because no one supports it. So, you know, because you got to remember, like we were working on server functions in Solid about almost a year before Next.js got them. Technically there were other solutions doing these kind of RPC things, but I think the common modern service functions did come from Solid Start. And I'd love to use that API, but I couldn't. Next just brute forces its way through, and I kid you not, within 2 months, every platform supports async local storage, except the client side web platform. So StackBlitz is broken for everyone. So yeah, async context. It's this idea that let me open a playground really simple. Come on, is it just the Google search bar is broken? Okay, I'm just not going to go up there. I don't know what's going on with me. Sorry, not playground. Damn it, playground. Okay, it's fine. We're here. Delete it. Okay, let's start to. I don't even care what's in here. It's the idea that. I mean, maybe if I looked at the proposal, that would be even easier. But the whole idea is that you can save something. You know what? I'm actually going to look at the proposal. It's easier than me to do it. Async context. No, not manager. Proposal. Let's see if I can find it. The idea is you can set something in scope, like a variable or like on the before the await, and have access to it after the await. Yeah, unless they're hacking stuff, they still don't, because it's not standard yet, and the browsers haven't implemented it. It's a kind of pain. It's very hard to polyfill. In a sense, solutions like Solid and a few others like React, who actually use async context, we kind of like semi use our own mechanisms to inject context back in. But the whole power of async context is we don't need to. Sync await proved ergonomics already. Async equal. Okay, so he's giving a full explanation here, but yeah, he's talking about Zone.js because like Angular literally worked off this, where it tried to like basically attach into the biggest problem with async await is from the outside of the async function, you just have that promise. Then there's no way to intercept between when after the await and what happens till the end of the function. Like the caller synchronously has the context up to it. You think about this like reactive system. We use tracking, for example. If someone we push a global variable onto the stack that says, "Hey, this is tracking right now," and then when the function's over, we remove it. So only things while it's running track. So if you put a set timeout in the middle and read something, that's gonna like the function's gonna run past the set timeout. It will schedule it, but then it pops itself off the stack. So at the time that thing gets read, no one's tracking. And it's the same thing with async await. It gets to the promise, returns the promise out, but then everything after the await happens outside of our scope. So like the most common thing that you hear people talking on the client with this is like, wouldn't it be cool if you could track after the await? I actually don't think that's actually very cool in a lot of cases, but I'll talk about it in this article. But the key part is on the server, it means that you can save information between requests. So you can go, look, I'm going to put the request object on here and then do something async. And then when I come back to this location in code, I'm going to still have the same request, right? Because you can't put on a global because the server supports multiple requests coming in. If you rely on a global, you could get trounced. Technically speaking, in Solid, we do use a global for some kind of context before async context. And we actually had this trick of like swapping it in. So we basically have special primitives. So whenever something is about to go async, we store it. And then because we have special primitives, when it comes back, we actually have the control to go like, okay, we're about to call the user's remaining code and we'll set the context back in. But it won't, like the user doesn't await anything. It's like the only primitive that's in the language that lets you handle continuation in the same sort of way is generators. Generators let you intercept because you control the yield back, and you can keep, like before you yield it back, you can basically do what you want. You can set something up. So it's kind of forced us into an interesting place because essentially the browsers didn't want to do it, like this whole kind of thing. Like I honestly don't care about this use case as much, but being able to handle pause starts on like component context in terms of hydration and stuff, there's a lot of benefits to being able to do this. This has historically been really expensive in Node, and it's impossible to polyfill. Over time, there have been performance improvements, but this is very powerful because I think for a while ago, someone in the React core team, I think it was Sebastian Mark Padre, was like, what if all context was async context? Like basically making the argument that like maybe you wouldn't even need a context API if React could just like, you could just set it in this kind of like React scope context, and then it would always just resume like within the scope of where your things are running. It's an interesting API with a lot of practical applications on the server, but I kind of started trying to play around with like, what if we had async context in the client? Like what would that change how we looked at things? Because like I know like the Svelte guys are really intent on this, because like their new API kind of brings await to the top level. Yes, and explicit tracking be async without async context, right? Which is why I actually started looking at this. I was looking at Metron. I was working at R3, which is Milo's new push-based reactive system, and he was like, I want to take this direction. And I was like, okay, you can do that underlying, but there's no way anyone was ever going to, like, the Solid is not going to go that way. Like, we arrived at where we wanted to, like, regardless of this. So I kind of started kind of playing around with this. And I think the whole async, I think there's a lot of topics nested around here that I want to get into if possible. So that's why I want to talk about this a bit today, because it's the oldest write-up that I have on the HackMD. So basically, the argument I've always made about this thing is, I know I've been a big proponent of keeping tracking on the synchronous thing. In fact, let me dump this into here in case people want their own reference to it. Remove what? What the? Sorry, what? Oh, weird. For some reason, my copy key has the word remove. That was just, what? Let's try this again. I'm having funnest time with this new mechanical keyboard. I mean, it looks cool. I don't know if, let me show you this new glowing mechanical keyboard thing. I actually got this when I got hired at Sentry. I'm not usually the type of person to use one of these, but here we go. It's even got glowing lights. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, probably not. It's like, no, Ryan, you can't do that. All right, let's try this again. I mean, did it lose track of the Mac shortcut buttons? Let me try here. Like maybe it thinks I'm on Windows right now. Okay. Done. Oh, actually, you know what? This is probably the wrong share link. Sorry. Yeah, this is the right share link. Ignore the first one. Anyway, okay. I know I've been a big prone to keeping tracking on the synchronous side of things. This is also because you want to hoist out expensive async stuff anyways. Like pretend you're grabbing the most liked comment off a user's favorite post. If you have a sequence like this, like await the user, await the post, await fetch, and they all depending on these different things, it would be terrible to refetch everything just because the liked count changed, right? I know above isn't reactive, but conceptually you want to break apart that process. User, post, and even comments probably all should be separated from finding the most liked. As you can see, it's basically right along the await boundary where you want those separations. You basically want each one of these in a separate computation. Now, how different is this if it looked like this? See, now, you see I'm not fetching anymore. I'm assuming that the fetch happened above in parallel, and now I'm just awaiting the stuff. Now, the consequence is something that arguably be synchronous after resolution is always going to be async, but you aren't doing a bunch of extra work. The promise is essentially cast. What I'm trying to say here is the problem with this example is because you're fetching here every time, right? If you actually did the fetching above and your process just did the await, you're actually not doing much extra work, but await is forcing everything here to be async, even if it doesn't need to be. Like if the user hasn't changed, but the like or count changed, yes, this is not going to fetch a new user, right? But it will force this to not be resolvable synchronously. It'll, microtask queue each of these. Not a big deal for the most part, but it's just something you have to consider. It would impact something like hydration. Don't get me wrong, because signals can resolve synchronously, this is infinitely better. See, so but basically, if I separate these into separate processes, these are all separate create asyncs, and then create a memo and do this. In this case, even if the above multiple async resources read in a single computation, it'll all run as expected. And the reason is because, like I'm saying, like even if we read all of these in here, because they can be accessed synchronously, if they're all available, it won't go async, right? However, with our throwing mechanism, you can end up with this. So I've been working with something like essentially with where you throw on async that's not available, right? So if you did, you could end up a place where like it does an expensive calculation and redoes the expensive calculation because you end up throwing it. If those signals were async, there's a chance that the first couple expensive calculations rerun. Yes, there are no side effects. So from the correctness standpoint, there's no problem, which you can't say about create effect, hence why it's split. But we always restart. Basically, I'm just trying to create an argument for why you might want continuation, right? So do you guys understand the difference between when I say continuation, what I mean by it, right? Because there's a couple different mechanisms. I'm trying to think if I want to scale draw it, but when you have a try catch and there's an error, you lose the context stack, right? You basically somewhere up in the stack you have a try, and then execute some code, and wherever it errors underneath, it will throw it up to the nearest catch, and the catch boundary will do those logic, and then it continues from that catch boundary. So yeah, I guess I'll draw this. Let's go white. Medium size. Let's blow this up a bit so I'm not so huge. All right, let's try this. So what I'm saying, yeah, it's medium size, but it's actually pretty small. Okay, whatever. So what I'm trying to say is, let's say we have some try block, right? And then we have catch. And see, I don't know if I should be using a ScalaDraw or a code editor for this, but my point is, you're going to call some function here, right? And no matter how deep down this function is, because you might, that function might call function 2, and function 2 might call function 3. The way this executes is if somewhere down here, function 3 throws something. I don't really care what it is. What ends up happening is you run here, go down the chain, throw something, and then it runs and handle error. Let's put the error in here. And then it goes to the next line, right? So essentially, this is not continuation. This is how JavaScript works, right? Continuation is more like async await, where essentially it gets to the point where it can't run anymore, and then it pauses, and then it continues, right? In a lot of ways, yeah, I guess I can't talk about this without coloration, can I? There's a lot of similarities between async await and errors. And the reason is, like, this was talking about error catching, right? Let's make this large. Okay, error catching, right? But what if we had the same kind of code example and we're talking about async? Okay, let's talk about async. Well, we're going to update the code a bit as we go to get to where we need to be, let's say. But let's start our code example with async. And in async, we're in a block, and we're going to, first of all, let's just call our function. We're going to come back and check ourselves later, but generally we call our function. Now, the first thing is that, yeah, let's actually, I'm trying to think of how to describe this, but the first thing is, is if you just call an async function like this, it's going to get to the next line once it gets to the first await in that stack. If you actually want to await it, like if you actually want to, process it and then get to the next line, kind of like how we have this try catch, actually get to the end of it, you actually need to await it first, right? Got it. Now, the thing is, if we have function, maybe I can just copy this, make my life a lot easier. Yeah, let's copy this. If we have function like this in function 2, and instead of throw something, we're like await something. Well, we have the same micro problem all the way up the tree, right? Because if function 3 isn't going to await this await unless you also await function 3 and function 2, same problem. And in fact, to tell the thing is async, we actually have to do this. So there we go. Now we get the behavior that we're expecting. But you kind of see, like, error catching. There are similarities between error catching and async, except async actually continues, as in when this finishes. Get in here. Let's go in here. This is actually next. This next happens before this next, right? This is next to, essentially, which is obviously when you throw, you can't continue, right? But the continuation means that you can actually continue here and actually have this next run and then this next and this run recursively back up the stack before you hit this next. Evergreen meme. I hope this is related, Dev, and you're not just sending me on a wild goose chase, but I'll take a look. Yeah, this meme never gets old. Function A, function B, function C, function D, function E, async function. Yeah. This is where I'm getting to. This is called coloration, right? Where's my Excalibur? Right? We've had the color basically our whole graph, but we get continuations out of it. So Another way of doing continuations is with generators as well. So, but they require coloration. So we're in this kind of interesting zone because I'm going to argue that almost all async pretty much requires some type of coloration. Like every solution you can think of, like in a sense, this is direct coloration. But if you start thinking about null checks, let's pretend you have a system where something is null until it's resolved. If you pass it through a bunch of functions, you're going to have to check at each point the potential of this thing being null. Like, I don't get me wrong. Like, I understand that you can check higher up in the tree, but if these functions are designed to be reusable in different places, so like function 3 can be used under function 2, but also under function 56, you're going to have to check if it's null, if it can accept nullable values, basically. So regardless of what solution you do, you need this kind of async always has this coloration, right? And like, even if you're not using async functions, you either, and you're trying to be smart about it, like use signals or something, you still are going to get to a zone where you're null checking or you're awaiting. Like there's some kind of syntactical wait because the code has to be aware of how to handle the situation it can't handle. There's only one mechanism in JavaScript that can handle situations that it doesn't know how to handle in a colorless way, and that's over here. Until we threw something, yes, there's a starting point, but in between the starting point and everything else here, there is no coloration. Now, there are programming languages out there, and JavaScript is not one of them, that have the ability to do error catching in a continued way without coloration. Basically, throw something here, and then if it's handled here properly, continue from where it threw from. JavaScript, unfortunately, is not one of those languages, but it is an interesting property. In a sense, it's funny, people have like these technical names for these things, but if you ever heard the term algebraic effect, this is what they're talking about. I don't get caught up in the old camel lingo or whatever, but essentially they're talking about a source of being able to do continuations in a colorless way. Okay. Why am I talking about this right now? Dev, again, with the link, Dan Abramoff has a great article about algebraic effects, and he goes through this whole thing about like the like basically if you can ask a specific type of question, like I don't know how to handle name, or an aspect, I don't know how to handle logging, you can write your code in a way that goes like, look, I need to log here, but I don't know in the system how logging's handled. Ask for a logger, and then something in like a try catch basically goes resume with the logger. Like, so ask for name, resume with the name. That's a simple example. This is a great article, honestly. This, I don't have to explain it thanks to Dan Abramoff. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because almost I as I started like looking through this kind of like async context kind of thing, this is the fundamental challenge here. If you want things to be colorless, you basically end up throwing. This is why React throws promises. But like there's no solution of like you either colored, whether it's null checks or async functions, or you're basically throwing. Like there's no actual realm in the middle between that. So it just, this is an interesting problem to solve, because if you throw, you have the risk, even when you're pure, of doing expensive calculations again. Like in a sense, you kind of wish that you could continue, But I don't know. Like, sorry, I just need that basis to continue with this conversation. Hopefully that makes sense to people. You just got all the links today. Affect language. What is this? It's a research level language. Algebraic effect. I mean, you also find stuff like this, I believe, in like OCaml and other functional languages. Anyways, continuing on where I was going here. Now, in JavaScript, there are only two forms of continuations, generators and async await. Unfortunately, async await, we can't reinsert our tracking context. So you have to use generators, or we have to wait for async context to arrive. So what I'm getting at is, not exactly. There's a third option, which is manually pass the tracking function, right? So this is kind of like the thing is like, if you did want to say track across boundaries, you either have to use generators or you have to pass the track considered. This way you can track after wait, except sure, that's fine in create async, but maybe now you need it in create memo, create effect, pretty much anywhere, because anywhere that could be async downstream, you still have this problem because async reads, like async is innately causes coloration. So you can't get away with just making your async primitive like this. Basically, everything needs to be. How do we get that into JSX? I mean, Robbie has answers he talked about earlier, but I'm not sure I'm convinced. Moreover, you need to be able to support async functions and promises everywhere. It sort of becomes this coloration issue again. TypeScript isn't going to be our friend. If you put a wait inside a JSX expression, it will want your whole component to be an async function. Yeah, I was playing around with the Svelte syntax, right? And I was like, okay. I mean, when I say the Svelte syntax, I was looking into it like years ago before Svelte proposal, but I just for similarity, I was like playing around with a place they put a wait, and they're like, oh, you can't do it. But the problem is, Solid compiles up the functions, so the actual only way to make this shut up is to do this. Oh, sorry. Am I not? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, is to do this. And like, sure, a compiler could fix this, but this is like not what you actually want. You don't want an async function. You just want, like, if you look at the compiled output, you want see, it's still erroring here because you actually want the async to go here. Like it conceptually works, right? Like but the problem is that the syntax is separated. Like, you need a much, like, this is not a compiler level thing that I could do unless I control the parser as well. Like, basically, like with JSX, I only actually control the compiled output. I read the ASTs, but I don't decide what the parser can read. You need a fully custom parser, like something you have in Svelte, to actually accomplish this, because otherwise, like, this is like removing this is an error for Babel. It can't get past that. Because it's just not correct JavaScript syntax, even before we talk about how we can compile it. Anyway, just a funny kind of side notes, but let's continue here. While this is a solution right now, I don't think it'll ever be the ideal one. Firstly, where this matters is the minimal case. If you force coloration on everyone, everything will just be chain of promises. People will resolve high just to avoid this mess. Secondly, when other solutions appear, this will look overtly complicated. Yes, Jotai has this API. People aren't passing Jotai atoms through their props and using the hierarchical trees. It is acceptable there, but I think it would be very challenging to the core state management and UI framework. As I said, Robbie's challenging this assumption, but this is what I've concluded. So what can we do if we want to give people this superpower in the future without completely butchering their code? What if you throw by default on access, but signals are also venable, i.e. you can await them if they're both promises and signals? Then most of the time you wouldn't, but at some time in the future, when async context arrives, we could add a feature to be able to let pure computations take async functions and have continuation. Since all computations need to be able to handle async anyway in 2.0, it isn't that far a stretch that when the time is right, we give this power. That way, when async context lands, people will find it works and people find that work needs to be sequential, we let them. To be fair, we probably could do this with generators today, but I have some reservations. Mostly, I haven't thought through this too hard, and I think async context we can do almost automatically. The catch, of course, is the random function value isn't going to be thenable, right? It's the is signal problem, right? Because anything can be reactive. If you want to weight an arbitrary expression, maybe some props you need to pass through, you might need to use like a resolve helper. What this does is turn any reactive expression into a promise, and it could shortcut if the input is already thenable. But then it could be a built-in mechanism. So what I'm saying is, if you directly have something from create async, you could just await it, or create memo or anything. Or if you have some kind of expression like a props expression, you could wrap the expression in resolve and await that if you cared about it. But of course, you could always just do this knowing the function might run twice. So what I'm saying is, like, this is an optional thing. By default, we throw in the memo, but if it's really important that it doesn't run twice, you could have the option of awaiting it. This is just a quick thought, but I think if we were ever convinced that giving this power, this is the way to go. Mostly that we don't have to force promises everywhere, especially in things like JSX, which aren't going to have that sequential problem, right? It's fine-grained. And we give users the ability to do stuff if they really want to. Of course, the performance could really suck with async context and using wait anyway, and this isn't worth doing, but it feels more in line with what we're going for. Basically, what I was just making this argument for why I'm not interested in changing our APIs to using await directly or using the get tracker. From my perspective, not only is it not necessary in the 90% case, it's also or actually probably like 95% case, it's also solvable in a future. Like we haven't closed off the design potential here with how our stuff works. I don't know, topic interesting, but it was just kind of a thought experiment, because as I said, I'm not even convinced that you don't want to separate these. Like, why aren't these already memoized? Do you know what I mean? Like, why? Like, there's probably some scenario where this is your case. But it's interesting to kind of open the space, because you definitely don't want to do it between fetches, and you kind of don't want it to force async when things can be synchronous. So I think the best solution is making it opt-in for people where it's really important. It's just like, because obviously awaiting a microtask is better when expensive things are involved than, say, throwing. But that's a choice that I think the developer has to make. And I think in 99.9% of chances, throwing is the correct answer. It'll be fine anyways. But some people might disagree, but that's why I wanted to talk about this today. Just kind of a mental experiment. How you doing, chat? You still with me? Okay, let me look at this. If everything's async, there's only one color. True. The funniest thing is, I mean, you do Preact, right? Have you done much React since Suspense has come in? There is challenges there in that the fact that like components re-render and it's like a very widescreen thing, but non-nullable async is incredibly a blessing. Like React, basically, you get something here and you can pretend that user is always user, even though you're fetching it. Like you don't have to null check it. And as long as the scope of the lines, the durations, that's kind of clear, it actually makes writing the code way simpler, because you remove all the coloration throughout, all the null checks, all the things, like all the conditionals, all the, like it basically drastically improves. Like I don't think it actually ends up being that. Like basically, if you're in a world where you have to pretend everything's reactive anyways, pretending everything's async is actually not much of a stretch at all. Like I could see in a plain world that this would be different, but if you're in a world where like you have to write stuff in such a way that it tracks, that you're wiring stuff implicit, like by saying like, okay, props ID is reactive, so we have to put it under this. Create async reactor, we put on the memo, we put this in JS. If you're already wiring the stuff that way, kind of naturally, which happens just by writing stuff in a way that's declarative, saying like this uses this, you're creating those bounds for bindings to you already. Once you do that, for the most part, I mean, obviously somebody debugging specifically following the trace of the code will see this and be like, okay, that's something. But for the most part, from a logical standpoint, it's not like it's actually not that big of a deal. Coloring is a feature, but it also makes refactoring incredibly expensive. And I think the reason React did suspense and move this is you don't always control all the components in your tree. Like someone introduces async somewhere, you have to basically refactor the whole component tree, like in terms of props of what's allowable. Like there's something very attractive from a modularity standpoint and a ability to kind of move stuff around, to be able to like remove this color. Oh, you mean remove the create? I don't know. It's kind of served as a like a fixed point on the API shape. I mean, it's interesting. You uses 3 characters or creates 5 characters, so that obviously kind of stands in the way of stuff, and people feel it's bulky. But it's also kind of like, I mean, this is silly. It just the people who talk about like shortness and svelte, I'd almost add a character to the API just to kind of point out how ridiculous that is. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I never actually thought about it. It's concise pattern. I don't want to switch to use. I know Vue did that, but use has a very specific meaning in the VDOM contents, and we needed to differentiate ourselves from React, even if it's just a matter of changing the wording slightly. Serious question. Maybe you don't do Dendable and then just have resolve for everything. I mean, the problem is like it's the wrapper function API, which isn't bad. This is what Bobby does. It's an arguable thing. It just or use React's use is another argument for it. It's just weird that if you're already wrapping something to then do the second wrapper. Every time I go down this path, and I think I've done it on the stream a couple times, I just end up back in the same API again and going like, no, this just doesn't make sense. Let's continue. You know what I mean? Like it just function coloring would make the split effects make more sense. I mean, this is why. It's funny though. This is why we have the split effects, so that we could basically say the front half is the only thing that's interruptible. But I get it. Yeah. So Preact has suspense. Yeah. Right. They have suspense, but not transitions. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get it. The problem is, I feel for React in this way, but it's actually their own fault, so I don't care. It's just when I was building the suspense primitives and stuff in Solid at the same time that React was building the stuff, except I was releasing it and I was building Solid Start built on it, and then I watched Remix rebuild the whole thing without it. I felt kind of bad for the Remix team because I was like, man, everything they're doing is just a worse version of this, and I understand they can't do it because React hasn't released it, and I think that like that's fine, and React hasn't given the tools, but the actual solution as proposed by React, and I know they haven't given people the way to do it because they're like, oh, you have to use it with RCs or stuff, is actually better than what React or TanStack is doing. It is just actually strictly better. It's unfortunate they can't get to it because of how React substituted it. It's just a better solution. Anyway, I mean, the problem is like I mean, decorators are also not spec, but you can't decorate a function as far as I know. You can decorate, like, I've looked at syntactical things. The thing is, you can decorate classes and class methods, right? I just let it, never bothered me anyway. Yeah. Yeah, I love the Frozen reference, but the funniest thing is when you actually have a working system that gets rid of this, it's so much better. I'm just so sad for the React devs who haven't experienced this. Like in Solid, this has been our last 5 years. And the funny thing is, Solid is nullable, so it's like not perfect, but having good working suspenses. When I take the 2.0 code, it's just like I get that feeling I get from React with suspense, but then combined with the single, it's just like it feels like I'm usually not the guy that played like the hype train, but it feels so right. It's so hard because you try to convince people and like devs sitting there and doing their thing, but like the second you touch it, you're just like, wow, like this is how it should. Like it just it I'm excited for Solid 2.0. That's all I gotta say. You can use either. Both projects are in slightly different places. I think if Tanstack is doing what you need, you should probably use it right now because they have more dedication on getting building it out at this moment in time. Solid is kind of like the people who are working on Solid Start are split between Tanstack and Solid Start right now, because the work that's fundamentals to moving Solid Start forward is also being happening in Tanstack. So like it depends. There's benefits to both of them. Solid Start has some more advanced features in terms of communication protocols. I did see Tanstack just got the selective rendering thing with SSR, which is cool. It's something that mechanically you can do in Solid Start if you use like client-only components, but they've built into the config, which is something that I always had in my head, but I just like with the route config thing, but I just never got to doing it. I actually think it'd probably be pretty trivial for us to add that feature. But that's an example where Tanstack is taking some of the refinement farther on stuff that's mechanically possible to do in Solid Start, but isn't actually being done today. So like, I think that like from that part, Tanstack Start is refining at a faster rate than Solid Start is. Solid Start was always a bit more primitive, but it also they're going to have different roles when all said and done. Tanstack Start is going to be like a Next.js full-fledged framework, all the details. Solid Start is going to be probably it shrinks down. Like it's basically our Create React app. It's basically like our Create Vite app with SSR. That's the goal of Solid Start. So over time, these projects will. I called it Start because I literally wanted it to be like a starter template. Low in opinions, low in frameworks, which puts a different place from Tanstack, which has all these built-ins. My eventual goal was obviously have stuff be able to just be built on top of Solid Start for Solid however people wanted, including things like Tanstack Start. But we're going to see, it's going to take a while for those efforts to completely like merge together. Oh, really? They added single flight mutations? That's awesome. Let me see that, Dev. Where is that? Let me grab that off Twitch. No, that's the wrong one. Let me grab that off Twitch. No, this is your spicy take. This is different. This is sorry. This is what I was talking about a minute ago. Spence enables a bunch of cool stuff. React, render blocking, promise caching, eager caching, components, bridging control for spoke. The only downfall is signals. It's like you had to put something there. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. I mean, this is why it's really hard for us to talk about it. But sorry, this is the SvelteKit link. Okay. Man, if only Solid could get more funded developers working on stuff. We have a lot of good ideas over here. But yeah, I mean, this is how all single page apps should work. It's a shape of frameworks to come. I said it, I guess, about a year and a half ago now. Tanstack's following suit. This is what frameworks will look like, not RSCs. what we did with solid start. It's fine. I actually think there's a world where something like RCs eventually gets there, but I think we're going to see consolidation on the patterns that we developed in solid start before that. I think there's still room for partials, but yeah. If you haven't watched this talk, which talk is this talk? Oh, yeah, no, I actually haven't watched it. I saw the proposal, but I actually haven't watched this. This is right around the time I took off. This is the Svelte talk that he did about the async stuff. I haven't actually had a chance. I should check it out. I am very interested in what they're doing in async as well. Yeah, it was fast. Anyway, anyways, this is cool news. I definitely interested to see things progress like this. It makes sense. It's single flight mutations. I'm glad that, I don't know if that is that the term people use now. I'm pretty stoked on that. As you guys know in the stream, single flight mutations started as a hackmd in this thing a little while ago. Probably in this one back in January 2024. But yeah, you guys were there in real time as we figured out how to actually make this work. But since most of them are based on single flight mutation, the stream should follow everything. Yeah, I wonder if this is the first time I actually used the term. Might have used it before this. Cool that it's becoming the term. It's like a thing. Didn't really market it, but I'm glad that. Anyway, where was I? Right, talking hackmds. I got a few more. So it is. You know what though? Maybe we leave proxies for. The stream's getting a little on the longer side. I think I have a whole bunch of topics, hackmds about projections and proxies and stores. All three of these. I'm still working on this one. I'm not even done. I'm going to leave that to next week. We can talk more about nested fine-grained reactivity next week. I can save the topic. Let's just switch gears into this week in JavaScript now. I think we are we're at that time of the stream. He basically spends 15 minutes talking about how SvelteKit's turning into solid start. Did he actually mention solid start though? I'm gathering he didn't, or in passing. Yeah, he did not. Of course not. But all the features are basically the features that yeah, of course, yeah. Server function, I mean, the pattern just it just freaking clicks. So it's so crazy though, because it took more time in hackmds and the streams and talking through this stuff than actually implementing it, and it's like, oh man, I wish I had more people implementing stuff. Anyway, yeah, experimenting with server functions. Right back to the first Vite talk. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It's always tricky if you spend your time on the R&D side, you're obviously going to be the first people to stuff. So like, you know, it's the other frameworks are watching now, so stuff is proceeding much quicker, which is cool. It means the ecosystem is moving at a much faster pace, right? Like Solid's rendering technique has arguably been the best way to render the DOM for like, I don't know, 7-8 years. But you know, it's only been the last year that people have like other frameworks have caught up to where that is. Server functions did not take that long. After we introduced them, 4 months later, Quick added them. About almost a year later, Next.js added them. SvelteKit's going to be getting them now. Like, Rich is great at introducing new topics, so maybe yeah. Let's see if we can borrow from that. This work that we're doing on async, I think, is incredible. I know Svelte's doing a lot of async stuff. I still like our solution a little bit better because it's even more unblocking, but we'll see how things evolve in time. I think the stuff that we're doing on stores and projections is actually more important. So yeah. If you're interested in the async stuff that we've been showing off, then go to my Signals 2.0 stream from about 3 or 4 months ago. It was in February. Yeah, I did a stream in February showing the stuff that I work on, and basically the whole first 2 hours of the stream is focusing on this. Obviously, we don't have the nice polished version, a conference talk version, but I show off basically working examples of how this approach is completely groundbreaking. No. They didn't talk to me. They do not like Signals. Everyone's like thinking that we were Remix is not in our camp. As I said at the top, they never talked about doing so. That was never going to happen. Anyways, let's switch this around to This Week in JavaScript. Give me a second to get my screens ready. Well, as I said, we will definitely talk about proxies and signals and stores and all this stuff next week. I had enough stuff, thankfully, with talking about algebraic effects and talking about the React videos. You guys kept me talking today, which is not hard to do, but definitely wasn't part of my original plan. So let's see what we can do. Oh man. Okay. So I'm going to pull up my own profile. I'm going to pull up Solid. I know I'm off screen. And then I'm going to pull up my bookmarks, and then we are good to go. I was like going to pull up my bookmarks, but I see more posts like this every single day, so maybe this is how I'm going to start This Week in JavaScript. Let's go. Let's get into here. Writing chessbook.com in SolidJS has absolutely ruined me. Dealing with React performance issues drives me crazy now, and it's not just performance. React constraints feel like shackles once you've experienced Signals, but React won too hard, and now we're stuck. I'm glad that the fire is starting to be lit. I'm hoping 2.0 is when we can finally like approach this for real. I was so concerned with 1.0 to make sure that everything was equivalent. We have more resources, more power, more stuff behind us. It's just maybe it's time to go Pete Hunt the world, you know? I think so, because they're important, and honestly, it's all like they're pretty core from my perspective. I still have more hydration SSR stuff to go through. What isn't blocking is the specific mechanism for the signals. I did lose about 2 or 3 weeks, kind of towards the end of May, and when I first got back. looking into R3, Milo's new library, which does push based. It's not quite ready to where I need it to be yet. It still might be potential, but I'm not going to hold up. I'm not performance based improvements or aren't going to be a hold up for Solid 2.0. Like we're already performing enough, you know, maybe not in like some very narrow reactive benchmark, but like we're already better than Solid 1.0 and like JS Framework benchmark, we're still at the front. Like it doesn't matter. That's not going to be hold up. But mechanical things, I think it's important to get right. So stores and projections are important, in my opinion. And I working in R3, and which is more constrained, force push, made me realize there's a big flaw in projections. And I'm going to talk about that next week. But it's very important. What do we got here? Sorry, just reading this chat. What do you think about Preact is better compared to React, or is it 99% the same? It's smaller. The funniest thing is, even from a performance standpoint, Preact and React aren't actually that different. Especially when you get into like heavier VDOM testing and stuff. It's funny. People always assume that Preact was like much faster than React. It's not really. It's in the video I show. I link to hide it, but like Preact is like in the JS Framework benchmark comes in, you know, maybe like 10% in front of React, like in the whole scale of things. Like it's like a 1.4 versus like a 1.5. But I think actually when you get to more hyper rate diffing differences in them, they're actually a lot more similar than you'd expect. Size is big though, right? When it's like 10 times smaller, it is a considerable difference. But that's basically the biggest thing going for it. It's kind of tricky because if you use Preact the way I feel it's intended, you have the same ecosystem issues as Solid, maybe even larger, because so many people don't bother building Preact libraries in favor of using React with it. That being said, there are Preact specific libraries that are amazingly small and very, very good. But like it's kind of that kind of world, because once you bring React libraries back into Preact, you're kind of already losing again. And at that point, yeah, I mean, people will have their opinions, but generally I would say you probably just end up using React anyways. Like what's that extra 30 kilobyte difference if you're bringing in an MUI anyways? Like and now you get all of React's features, which exceed what Preact has. Preact's part of its trade-off of being minimal is it doesn't have all the features. Solid actually has a lot more of those React features, ironically. Smaller in the sense that we've implemented them into using different technology, a different approach, but it's yeah. Preact team is not stoked about people. React team's not stoked about people putting stuff in Preact because it literally messes like with the JSX plugin. Like it gets in the way of them being able to do kind of optimizations they want to do with the compiler. Like you shouldn't do that really. Like you can, but it's not really. Yeah, there's no way that the React team is stoked about that. You're messing with their stuff. Anyway, yeah, let's get going more into this. Where do we want to start? Oh, I mean, we can start right with here. Here's my prediction. I love this. David called shot October 31st, 2022. Here's my prediction. Under Shopify, Preact and Remix will integrate deeply and form a new framework that starts as a React compat framework and aggressively breaks away from it philosophically. With Miller, Jackson, and Florence under this one roof, you have all the talent you need. It took a few years, but people don't know Dave's our community manager, Solid.js. He keeps the ecosystem flowing. But yeah, for 3 years ago, that was a pretty good called shot. Let's continue on here. Oh yeah, I was like, why did I bookmark this tweet? And I remember now is I'm usually I got better of it, but when Michael Jackson made the comment about signals not scaling, I was very tempted to quote tweet something along the lines of this is another tweet that probably won't age well. But now that I've shown this tweet out, he's probably going to delete it. So let's not focus on that too much. We'll get into Justin's stuff in a minute. I thought this was interesting. This is more remix stuff, but he's just like basically like filling in the blanks. He's probably getting a lot of crap for splitting off React, and it's just kind of funny. Maybe I read this wrong, but like basically this is all you ever hear from anyone now when you say like, don't use React, use Svelte, use this. Everyone's just like the ecosystem, anyway, it's just, I saw that and I was like, oh man, same stuff. Anyways, let's continue on here. I actually have a list that I wanted to attack too. Yeah, first thing I have on my list is right here, RCs and Vite. This is big. They're talking about it because it will help Remix get them in. But if you guys remember, Nikhil made an RSC plugin for Vite back like 3 years ago, but nobody was happy with it, but it worked. And then he got Vinci to work as the first thing to do with RCs. And it's taken almost now 2 or 3 years from that point in time when he got RCs working in Vite to us actually having the actual solution. But this is the legit actual solution. So this is huge, right? Before, the only way to use RSCs in Vite was basically to use Vinci, right? I'm glad that people working close to it, like, you have to understand that this was actually really tricky because like the React team had to sign off on it being the way they wanted it to work. And it, like someone had to be close enough to Vite to do it. Like, this is why, lone wolf like Nikhil couldn't just go in and go like, look, I implemented it, which he did, as I said, almost 3 years ago. But now, like, this is a game changer. It's kind of, you're almost asking, why did this take so long? It's almost like too late. Like, it's not too late. Like, obviously RCs are still thing growing and all this, but like, it's odd. It's kind of like, why would you only have them work for Webpack? Like, why wouldn't you, like, when you release a new feature, you want it to work on every platform, and obviously you can't support every platform, but you have to do at least 2 to prove that it's viable. And if you do 2, then like people can move on or do stuff with it. Like, it's kind of like when meta frameworks, it would be like a meta framework coming out and be like, look, our stuff only works on Netlify, right? And then like you'd be like, okay, but what about Cloudflare and Vercel and Fastify and all these other ones, right? Like, people would have bad feelings about that. And it's crazy that, in a sense, like React only working on Webpack actually kind of did the same sort of thing, because no one uses Webpack anymore except for like, there's a lot of like people like create React app, but like in terms of like meta frameworks and stuff, no one uses Webpack anymore except for Next. Like, basically nobody. So like, they needed to do it to support Next, but like, so like, yeah, it's kind of like one of these things where it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm glad this has happened. This is a long time coming. It's just weird because, like, how much did this interfere with the adoption of RCs at the beginning? How much did this lend to that narrative around Vercel that probably isn't completely fair, yet here we are. You know what I mean? Like, anyways, it's good. It's very good that this exists. So this is awesome, right? And the Emb API was key to it, right? Like, basically, Nikhil, I don't know if people realize this, Nikhil created Vinci not for Solid Start. He kind of had moved on to doing React stuff with his work, He could hire people that way, and he'd done enough stuff, but he still felt like some obligation to us. I mean, he's a good guy. He felt, but he built Vinci because he wanted to use RSCs with Vite, and he thought Next.js was super slow in dev. So the primary reason he built Vinci was actually to support RSCs, even though that's not how most people end up using Vinci and SolidStart and TanStack Start to the users. He actually created literally to support RSCs in Vite. So like it took seeing that to get the Env API in order to get actual RSC things. So it's been a long journey. So like I think everyone involved, even Nikhil, who's not really involved in this directly, should pat themselves on the back on job well done. It's just kind of crazy that it took this long. Not on the part of the people who worked on creating this plugin, just the fact that this was not a priority on the React side of things. Yeah, I think Parcel beat to it. Like, is there a bias here? I wonder. I've always wondered if there was. I think it's interesting. Yeah, okay, that's fair. Yeah, like Vite is a weird hack of things, and I've hit this before. But you're like, why wasn't there a rollup plugin? I mean, if there's a rollup plugin, then someone could have done something. Why do they call them RCs and not SCs? That's, I mean, I think it's React trademark, right? I mean, to be fair, RCs do speak on a proprietary React protocol, right? In a sense, like but like I do feel like embracing Vite earlier, and I understand probably it didn't make sense. Like everyone lives in their own scope of the world, so they only have a certain perspective of what they're seeing, right? But Vite was like it's the most clear, obvious win that there's been in the ecosystem in over a decade. Like in the way that, like I would say even more than like, oh yeah, back in 2014, it's like, yeah, React's a feature. Vite was that even like more so when it came out. It's literally the only thing on developer surveys that continues to outpace 100%. Like it's just, it's clearly the thing, and you don't need hindsight for it. It was clear from almost the beginning. This whole path, you have to be coming from a very interesting perspective to not like see that. Even like when it's kind of sheltered a bit from the React ecosystem, big voices in the React community, people like Theo, even like made it very clear that like Vite was the obvious choice. Yes, the plugin design using like Rollup was the game changer, and we got to thank the Preact guys for this. Jason Miller, the Unplugin, was basically saying like, oh, like that was the whole thing of like just realizing you have a universal plugin mechanism. That was the piece, right? But yes, other frameworks can and will likely implement them differently. I guess the interesting part is there like a general server component plugin possible now? Because like Vinci basically works independent of React as a hook in, and if we could get the equivalent here, like with Vite plugin, I think we could do that. Like he based it off Bun actually, which I don't. He looked at Bun app, which is this thing Jared sketched up one day. He's like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we did this, guys? And then he like never did it. But Nikhil saw that and he actually recreated that on top of Vite, and that's what Vinci was. It's funny. Vinci had implementation issues; it had a lot of mess. He kind of hacked it together, but the actual idea behind Vinci is something that I think is still actually what I'm actually looking for in that middle layer. It's like maybe this will eventually lead to more features inside Vite, but like even 3 years later, he created the right abstraction. Maybe just the not best implementation, because he was literally doing what Vite did in the first place, hacking a bunch of tools together and him by himself didn't have the wherewithal to actually fix how all that hacking worked. But from an API standpoint, from a boundary standpoint, from a position standpoint, from like when I look at the axes graph of how solution space, it is still to this day, I think the right solution. Anyway, what else I got here? Yeah. Selective SSR. This is cool. I looked at this immediately. I'm like, I thought about doing this, but I never did it because there's like a hierarchical concern here. The answer to the hierarchical concern is actually really simple. You can only override one direction. Once you go to data only, or like once you go to server false, you can't go to server true underneath it. It gets ignored. You have to read the small print, but basically it starts from server true, data only, client only. Like it goes through those steps. And truthfully, if I was going to implement this feature myself in a framework, I would have just stopped at data only. I don't think there's any value to SSR false. We'll see. I might be proven wrong, but essentially, to me, SSR false is data only. But I think this is a perfect example where Tanner is being very flexible to handle all these cases. I would be so tempted to freaking streamline it more. So I think this is like he talks about here. Root default to SSR true. Post sets false. So neither before our loader will run on the server, and the root component won't be rendered on the server. Post sets SSR true, but inherits false from its parent. Because the inherited value can only change to be more restrictive, true has no effect, inherited false will remain. See, this is a smart system. As I said, the only thing is I can't think of a single scenario where I actually basically any scenario in which I'm trying to think of a scenario. Any scenario in which I want SSR false and not do the data fetching, you'd immediately go, well, couldn't you just fetch the data in the component at that point? And the argument is not on future navigations. So the only time you would actually want data only, or not want data only, like you'd want to not fetch on the server, is if the client is closer to the data source than the server at all times. Yeah. I mean, it's a small thing, but I think I would actually change it around a bit. I would go, I mean, I understand this is kind of clever because data only is also kind of like true, but it's a string, you know, where false is false. So you can like use truthy thing. But I'd almost view like SSR is data only. That is what SSR is, because you're not SSR. When you say SSR false, you're saying I'm not SSRing it, but I'm fetching the data. And then like, so for me, it's like SR true, SSR false, and then like SSR no data. You know what I mean? Like, I understand it's a small semantic thing. It's just like in my head, the special case is actually the no data. That's a rare case. We're saying data only is actually fairly common. It's not as common as SSR true, but I think the two most common things are SSR true and data only. Anyway, let's see here. What else do I have on my list? Justin's proposal next. Okay, yeah. So I only got a couple things left. I'm going to quickly blow through some of the solid stuff, just for people keeping track because I haven't streamed in a while. Local first operating system built with Solid.js. Yeah, there's so many lovely examples coming out here. Is your React app slow and you code error prone? Are you unnecessary using memory context? Use Motion. We're investigating an approach that lets you use solid components inside your React app. You need past state pre-props. I love this idea, by the way, because using React components inside your your Solid app is the Preact problem all over again. Like you're just diluting it. But if you have a React app and you want to start the migration, at a certain point, you're going to have to do the top down flip. And when you do, you're going to go all in. And that's what I want. But until that point, get a taste. Cool. Solid.js with Effect.ts. There's just so many integrations and things happening now that I don't even have to get my hands in it. Urban Planner, mutable reactivity, looking at stores. Maybe we'll review this a bit when I talk about the stuff next week. Starter projects. This was a good podcast. If you guys didn't check it out, talked for quite a while, which is unusual for the podcast. Usually people cut me off. Yeah, I'm going to speak at JS Nation this year in New York. What else we got? Permix. Oh, it's like an auth system. Cool. This is cool. AI. I've been finding a lot of AI code startups, as I said before, using Solid for some reason. Even though Solid apparently doesn't have as good, models with the LLM, it seems like the people building AI tools want to use Solid. I talked to another startup founder, not this guy even, yesterday about this stuff. I keep on getting these messages. I think we're getting close to the right time. I'm excited. Okay, so that's it for Solid. I don't think there's much on my timeline. Okay, let's talk about the last couple topics today. First one is Justin's proposal. Okay. Justin. I'd love to hear this week, Jack. Okay. I've looked at this stuff in the past, declarative partial updates. I read this article. I haven't read the new one, so let's do a skim here and see what this is about. The time is right for a DOM templating API. Okay, that's his argument. I'm going to put some bias out here. I've always been kind of against this. I've been worried that we haven't really figured out the best way to do templating, and it'd be very scary if everyone just started going along the wrong path here. Sorry. Hope to meet you in person then again if it's yeah. Are you gonna speak in person and not remote? I guess you'll find out. Yeah, I'm gonna be there in person this time. I haven't been taking as many trips to Europe as recently. Like I usually go to JS Nation. I didn't go this year. But I'm gonna be at the New York one. Yeah. All right. Okay. Web platform is most successful application of all time. Okay, let me put this link in so you guys can see it. God, why am I in Vistaprint? There. All right. Yeah, I've got little kids now. I'm not even going. I'm not going to be at Beat Comp. I'm going to try and do the panel, but I got invited to do Beat Comp in person. I got a little newborn. I'm not making the trip right now. I do a stateside trip, but going to Europe is like an all week affair, pretty much. All right. The proposal is high level. We're already getting the opinions. We haven't even got into it yet. Web platform sexual plan. As much as I hate the DOM sometimes receives it's served, blah, 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 has shown amazing tools, yet the DOM is missing one of the most important popular features in modern web development, templating, currently no way. Yeah. Property setups. Yeah, he's right. Because we have to care about security and stuff when we're building stuff. The kind of templating cornerstone of all modern frameworks. The reason to declare template problem. One thing I love about Lit, and I think this is a trademark sign of anyone who does like less popular frameworks, generally speaking, is he mentions like pretty much everyone. Look, he's even got Marco in here. And I tend to do that as well. I appreciate this because a lot of authors, a lot of things, they'll like stop at React, Vue, Angular, and then like their framework. Quick isn't spelled properly, but I think that can be forgiven. The reason is that declared templates are popular, but we count. I mean, it makes his argument that everyone uses it. As far as period imperative DOM API is easier to secure, get tech performance can be faster than all the handwritten code. Static analysis, efficient server rendering becomes possible because you basically just end up with strings. Yeah. It's rare to see a technique win so completely on so many axes. That's good for DX and UX. Yeah, agree. Template is great. What's the problem with the current situation? The biggest problem is the stream core need to the web platform should adapt their needs. We also have a concept of lacking templates. Bad for everyone. You just suffer long-term app downloads. Blah 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 blah. Okay, yeah. Well, is that true? I'm thinking like you need to download the actual specific template anyway, right? Okay. Developers need to reach for a library that's tools to do basic things, or it gets you. Okay. So now he's just talking about like basically using web components, blah, blah, blah. Frameworks are hard to build because they implement templating, blah, 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 platform restriction, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay. There've been proposals for E4X. Yeah. Big one shift Firefox, E8 for simplification, blah, blah, blah. Good time to address. The big reason I think now is that frameworks have worn great cow past the pave, and it's true that there's a lot of variety to use Line template solutions. They're actually very similar in a lot of ways. More similar to the years. We understand template syntax and read activity models a lot better than that. I agree. And also, not everyone uses a framework, and there's value. Okay, there's in-flight proposals very low, like DOM parts, but I think higher level APIs like to take off more load. Interesting. I was excited about DOM parts because again, I like small things. I think when we're ambitious, it's very dangerous on standard side. Okay. Popular client templates out the share from those syntax bindings, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. Even cross HTML based, yeah, versus JavaScript based, yeah. See, he puts lit on the side, which is, I actually agree with this. Lit and Solid actually have some of the most similar templating, and the way we actually handle web components is actually similar. But yes, it's funny how he puts it on that side. I don't know if like Svelte people would agree or whatever, though. I think Svelte is an interesting one. I think Svelte, I mean, these are just SFC formats to be fair, but I think Svelte is an interesting zone where its templating language is relatively more powerful than you'd expect. Things get more similar to JavaScript APIs and you do it. Similar semantics, popular system DOMs, template expressions, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, this is me reading at 1.5. This made a good initial DOM creation, but bad for template updates, which are still imperative. We can build APIs in today's JavaScript, tag template literals. Okay. Challenge with tag template literals has been that I don't get to compile them the way I want, and I like having function expressions. Tag templates are great, but they're often an unsung hero feature, but they are a bit more syntactic over in the JSX, yeah, especially with using compose system. People love JSX, yes. So why don't we add JSX to JavaScript? Oh, please don't tell me they're going here. The problem is JSX is all syntax, no semantics. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry, thank you, Justin. They actually say that in the spec. And because they made that guarantee, I don't think it can ever be added. If it actually is a breaking change to JSX to add it to the browser. Everyone like this is what I mean. In a way, you could say like it's worth getting angry at things like TypeScript and ESBuild, all those guys who build the React compiler semantics built in, because that is not what JSX is. And you guys, and they're kind of pushing this thing that basically builds React into it. I was talking to that guy who was working the LM AI thing, and he was doing the simple example where he was using like Babel standalone in the client to test some kind of generated thing. And he's like, "Can I do this to Solid?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you just need our Babel plugin, and you can run it with Babel inline. It could work." And he's like, "Oh, why don't I need this for React?" I'm like, "It's because React is built into Babel." Kind of crazy, but yeah. JS semantics nailed that's probably already the hardest part of hypothetical JS pros, but there's a chicken egg problem when it comes to templating. In order to ensure JSX like syntax semantics fully expressive DOM templating, we need to target templating system to verify against. It seems like React already provides this, but in some ways React's templating is less powerful expressive than all the other systems. She doesn't say all, but it is. For instance, React is the part of way to explicitly bind properties, advanced downloads, blah, blah, blah. Exactly. Again, people love JSX. JSX is actually probably popular, blah, blah, blah. Luckily, the good thing is non-standard JSX is the pure syntax with no runtime semantics. Yes, this means we can build JSX tag literal compilers as many as we want, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Interesting. Completely remember HTML based. So he basically wants to use something similar to tag template literal and then have us compile to it. Why don't we do HTML first? The answer would be HTML is much, much larger undertaking. The beauty of it's makes with plain JavaScript, blah, blah, blah. Yes. So you don't have to worry about control flows. Node.js template definitions, JavaScript subset. Reactivity, VDOM definitely used React, template identity used in it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So these are the three ways to render. He gave lit the nod here, but this is basically dirty checking. I give Angular the nod, but in my video, I literally used lit as my example for dirty checking. So I'm okay with him saying like these are the three modern ways that people do rendering. I could argue that the Angular and lit actually sit here, and classically Svelte, but Vue and Svelte have come over to our side now, and Angular is on its way. Good search comfort. The model works with data. Unfortunately, slow compared to other parts and various and differing algorithms. Template editing, which is fast and gives similar results to differing in a majority use cases. It fits well technical. It would be straightforward to specify. Signals are great, in my opinion. I strongly support the proposal. Apply and to be in signals based. Signals will work when they're doing. There's a lot of data non-signal form and platforms that don't produce signals. Re-rendering is an easy way to pick up non-signal data. Pretty easy to have a system that supports both templating and fine-grained consistent models of things. Okay. I mean, technically, because I built on top of tag template literals with Solid, I can agree with this. Signal pure, well, the passive signal binder would never need to be re-rendered, but it could always work. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Typically, it's done on the component layer. I think this makes it template identity with signals a winning combination that's fast. Okay. Because I mean, signals don't need the template identity, but he's right. There's no actual downside of this, other than syntax. But we just compile it. The question is, the part is scheduling of DOM updates. Like, does he expect signals to natively interact with this? Okay, I mean, this is only part one. I get where he's going for. Yeah, except for a compile target. Okay. This doesn't say very much. I kind of get where he's coming from. Prozo says that if something is a signal, then an effect must be added by the browser and update automatically. But where does the effect come from? Yeah, I mean, there's holes here if that's the case. Yeah, but like, see, it's dangerous to assume that native signals should directly go to the DOM. If that's where that's going to be, I'm going to drag my feet on this one again too. Let me see what the other article says. Okay. Yeah. Constraints, web compatibility, standard files, standard JavaScript, low implemented for serious, no performance regression existing, ergonomics, blah, blah, blah. These are all good qualities, opinions, functional style programming, composition, blah, 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 blah. Template syntax looks fine. Oh, he's comparing them. Okay. Yes. And he's using a for loop. It's interesting because there's different semantics. These things do very different things. Like map and v-for are pretty different. Actually v-for and map are actually kind of similar in a lot of cases. No, but like our map array is very different. Like some of them use memoized mapping and other ones don't. The actual mechanism of it, I don't think there's like React doesn't memoize its map. It literally re-renders the whole thing. See, I thought what he was going to say is like this belongs outside the templating language because like in lit it's outside. I'm happy with this because then you can just stick whatever the hell you want in here. The mutate DOM as they are evaluated. Okay. Tag template literals. I'm following you. I mean, they're bulky. That's why you don't want to use them. The React team actually made an argument against something like tag template literals because they knew they were coming. No, there's no problem here. Binding template parts. Yeah. Okay. On prefix, yeah. Okay. I mean, that's fine. I'm actually not that. I mean, it's okay to define things here. I think this is like a bit. I mean, this is kind of the fact that he feels he needs to do this shows that HTML is kind of flawed, to begin with. It is interesting. Solid does something very similar with we have prop colon on colon attribute. Like we actually have different syntax for this for JS. I suppose if JSX wasn't a limit, we might have considered a shorter syntax. Yeah. So they work well. So I mean, this is fine. He hasn't really talked about signals. Okay, here we go. This can be more efficient in some cases. Yes. So then there's a lot that happens between this and this. There's a lot of important detail if it's getting okay. Okay. Of course they're asking for something like this, but okay. It is interesting though. Like if we're getting to a point of defining things that we're fine with this, then JSX would be fine. My argument was that I didn't want JSX because I'm worried about being able to define these kind of things. Isn't this just standardizing lit? Honestly, yes and no. I think it's more actually this simply because it's extended goals and the shape is the most way to accomplish that. It's like despite because the Polymer team had the same constraints in the web platform, blah 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's still not saying what this does exactly, but I'm assuming this outputs DOM elements. Actually, I'm not even sure what it outputs because if it re-renders, it has to use it fixed in place. I guess it does output DOM elements. And then like associates them with the tag template literal so that they're cached. Yeah, okay. I guess he's assuming some sort of list helper in every version. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay leaving the list helper to user space, but like when you start like trying to tie up the knot with fine grained, this is an area that I don't feel is nearly as worked out. And it's funny, as someone who's been working for 10 years, we just haven't had the exposure and the different opinions in here yet. Like, I'm not going to pretend like, we have the most experience. This is the one way, but like, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think he's trying to jump in on it and he's like, oh, there's a proposal, but like, yeah, I get why he's working on this. This is the same thing. My gut feel is we need to start smaller and maybe get here. If he's had a hard time get this across before, he's going to probably have a hard time again. Like, I hope, So I hope that I would love to just see if we can have some nice low level primitives to improve the problems that we have today. I mean, obviously, this is what I say as a framework author. I understand, like, this is arguably the biggest, like, black spot on web components from like look, they're so easy, you can just get started standpoint. They don't have a full solution. So like he needs this to happen. But it's I on some level, if we ignore change updates, like, and I don't know if we can do this without actually like making space for the signals spec, but if we can basically not do what he's saying about signals, and this still gives a templating language that we can like use as a fragment, like you know, to create DOM elements. I see some value of it, but I think there's probably a lower level primitive that will, in the meanwhile, handle this case better as we figure things out. I know it's funny. I was complaining about the standards moving too slow, or moving slow, but I actually don't think they move too slow. I think it just we need to move slow because we have to be careful. What am I looking at here? I'll go Twitch tree aware. Tree aware task scheduler. I think it's useful way to schedule down onto the task. I mean, we all build this. It's funny. If you look at the Solid 2.0 code, I have a queue. I think this is interesting. He needs a way to organize it for web codes. This is again another one of those really like weak spots where like when you have a third party framework, you kind of get this kind of queuing. It's when I think about this and I look at the queues that we have Solid 2.0, it's stuff like suspense completely messes with the queue. I had to completely redesign the stuff to handle suspense and transitions. This is kind of why I don't want the signals directly into the DOM, because I can picture something nice like this and then picture smashing it to hell when with some of the advanced stuff I want to do with async and signals, which is so. But yes, this makes sense. The lack of analysis is why is left out of the signals proposal. It's also possible, but like, yes, but for good reason. Like, you know, the idea of tree structured ownership or watchers and build the schedule order, then blah 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 blah. Current watchers across async, but it's a lot to add to signals. I think it wouldn't get done. Mm-hmm. But on the DOM side, I think we already have a tree that yeah. Like I can see value of this just existing. I just don't want. It's we're very close to a line where it's like, are we just going to build Solid.js into the browser? And I don't like. Some people have asked me. They've looked at DOM expressions and they're like, you know, which is our fine grained render, and they're like, can we generalize this in a way that everyone could use it? And it's like, I've shown it's possible. If you look at JS Framework Benchmark, I had a fine grained version of Vue like years before Vue Vapor, you know, and like, but like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I still think that assumes a lot. I like how he's approaching this. This is at least reasonable that he's not making it prescriptive like this way. It's challenging is when you want to take this behavior and actually make it into a templating language. Like this, I get and I don't have a problem with. He's just adding custom scheduler, and the fact that the DOM has a scheduler is great. Why hasn't it had a scheduler yet? It's just taking it farther than this is where things get dangerous. Okay. It's interesting. It's cool. Okay. Last topic. Let's talk Vercel. Okay. Just looking at the chat here. Am I the only one who thinks that maybe we shouldn't add more framework functions as web standards? Leave framework functionality to framework, keep JS low. I just think that like we should just be very selective in a small portions. Adding new capability environment that is a mistake. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of stuck. The web has to be backwards compatible. Oh yeah, I remember got all the A+ promise spec libraries. There were so many promise libraries back in the day. All right. Okay, so yeah, let's talk the last thing. I know you're still still here, eh? Okay. There's actually two topics related, but let's go to my bookmarks. I think no bookmarks. Okay, first the quick one. After 5 years, I just finished my last week of Vercel. What a ride. Grateful to this community and proud to have helped people learn React and Next. Many tweets sent to friends. I guess I don't have to wear all black now. I'm going to switch up my wardrobe. I mean, this is big news. People are excited for his next move, so I'm gathering there's something really cool going on. But the way I look at this is Lee Rob is the last of a certain time period in web dev. The DevRel, like there's still DevRels, but he is the last of like what I call the classic phase of DevRels, kind of where like which kind of during the transition into what like way things move now. I don't think we have the same kind of I don't know if we have the same kind of DevRel pull these days as like it used to. I'm talking about like there was that chain, for a long time that was like Netlify's strong point, right? Jason Langstrom, Sarah Drasner, Cassidy, like there have been like and Vercel also, along with Lee. God, why can't I remember her name right now? I feel like we're kind of hitting an end of that classic DevRel era, and Lee might be the last one standing. Yeah, Cassidy, yeah, exactly. Williams, yeah. Like, so this, I mean, obviously, there's still people doing DevRel, but there was like this kind of classic period of DevRel that kind of COVID kind of impacted and changed the way we viewed the job. And somebody said a while back that like DevRel was a zero interest rate thing or whatever. Like the whole thing shifted. Yeah, Lydia. Yeah. And for a while there, I was thinking to myself, like Lee is like almost like the classic one. Even he shifted in his techniques in terms of like kind of videos and stuff he put out, but like I feel like this is the final send off at the end of an era. And maybe it's just my age, because these are the people that I followed. I wasn't like, this is a time before like we started getting more like YouTube influencer types into our space and stuff. And obviously people like Lee make good use of YouTube and all the tools available, but it's different now. So it's definitely very cool to kind of, I don't know. I don't know what to think about this. It's definitely a change. So he wrote an article here about things he learned. I think these are all great lessons. What do we got here? Go hard at work and work home. I responded to a next tweet while sitting on a beach during my honeymoon. That probably sounds insane, and yeah, it actually is. Versailles was my first startup I worked up. Before Versailles, I would leave work and turn that part of my brain off. But ironically, because of passion of building things, I would spend nights and weeks writing code, reading forms. Yeah, been there. It's Tim passion with my work. I loved it. Yeah, this is a very dangerous combination when your work is your passion. Passion without boundaries leads you to burnout. If you're going to go hard work, everything you have to learn to go home. Yep. I liked helping developers. I liked upset customers as a happy one. So I was reluctant to give away my Legos. You can do both. You can build a self-driving car and take the Ferrari out on the drive sometimes. I started to spend way more time on recruiting to hire people who actually love the work for one day. And slowly I was able to build a system that allowed me to actually disconnect from work when I needed to. Exactly. Obviously, advice for balance and mediocrity. That's not what I want. I want to go hard at work. I want to ship lots of code between, not substitute putting in the hours. But when I'm offline, I'm offline. Yeah. Anyway, you can work really hard and set clear boundaries. Yeah. Everything can be done faster. You push fear, you can pace without being an asshole. The ideal state of your team and ship. If you're okay with things move slowly, they will. Aggressive deadlines. Okay. Great advantage to be how quickly you ship. Listen to feedback and iterate on the product. Okay. That's probably very good advice. Like, set aggressive deadlines for yourself. It often starts with a simple question: what would it take to ship next week instead? I feel like this is maybe a lesson that I knew one time when I used to run product teams that maybe I have gotten away from in my heavy R&D roles these days. Scale or die trying. Yeah. What's the takeaway? Scale yourself by hiring great people and building a support team. Okay. Taking ownership doesn't mean taking all the work yourself. Yeah. Always be recruiting. If you don't scale the team, your best bet, go overloaded. Yeah. Things, higher questions. Hell yes or no. It means say no to many good but not great candidates. Closing great people sometimes requires unconventional measure. When the company is growing fast, there's always more to do with the capacity allows. If you can't support another team's request because your team's too busy, you can't upset done. Yeah, okay. You have to act fast, performance. Okay. Yeah, I mean this makes sense. Don't swoop and poop. New product starting theme. You cannot ship this. Keep in mind for months. Then I came in the last minute and started asking to it. I poked decision made months ago. I didn't have the context and I understand the constraints. Okay, yeah, this is a good management tip. Everyone was mad at me, in fact, the terms. Huh. Yeah, I think this happens when people get higher up and they kind of out of it. Talk to people first, shocking, yeah. Listen to your team, best ideas win. It's okay to change your mind. I reviewed every Vercel tweet for years. I thought I had good reason for this. Someone needed to be the person to stop the line from shipping. I'd test the product. You can't take back social posts. Good, true. Sure, you can delete them, but it looks sloppy. Oh, yeah. Once the message got the community, it's hard to unwind. People would tag me regardless, and I have to go clean things up. I came bottleneck in the friction getting posts. I thought I was doing things that don't scale and make yourself always available. But then I went on an actual vacation where I turned off my phone and realized it wasn't working. The process was slow and had a lot of approval steps, so honest with myself. Fallacy of treating all social posts the same, as Pedro said. Happens in companies is that one size fits all decision-making process, where one's heavyweight process all decisions, including lightweight ones. Two-way door decisions should be made by individuals. Well, actually, one-way doors. If you mess up with a tweet about a small feature, you could just repost it and everything will be okay. The teams working on these changes should have autonomy to ship. Gave people autonomy, yeah. Be willing to change your mind and present with new information. Okay. The only thing constitutes to my tears falling curiosity. Yeah. If you're chief here, startups can be messy and imperfect, but rewarding. Yep. It's awesome. Good stuff, Lee. Honestly, I think everyone thanks for your service over the years at Vercel. You did a great job of promoting Vercel and also like just making the company feel like that much of a friendlier place, you know, from the outside. Okay, I know you guys have been waiting for this because I did write some stuff. It's the last topic. Yeah, proxy stuff will come up next week when I talk about stores. And it's my fault. I kind of changed. I mean, other people saw this too, but I kind of triggered off this ball. Whereas, like, the news, as you guys know, Nux Lab got acquired by Vercel. And Nux Lab, just so people understand, technically, the creator of Nuxt, Sebastian, company that he built around Nuxt. But actually, from the practical standpoint, day to day, Nuxt is actually maintained by Daniel Rowe. I know Sebastian hasn't been like hands on for years in the same way, and he's been building a product. He's been building a company, which is a little bit different than Nuxt, the framework. So you have to, I've had this explained to me before in the past, and maybe I'm not getting it 100% right, but you have to understand that there's a difference between Nux Labs and Nuxt, right? So for the users who do not know what Nuxt is, which I doubt anyone in the stream is the case, Nuxt is Vue's meta framework. Like Next, it was kind of built kind of separate from the core team. That wasn't the trend back then. It wasn't like, you know, like SvelteKit or Solid Start. This is more like Next, where an enterprising individual decide that, hey, there's a market for full stack framework. And my understanding is that Sebastian was actually very influenced by Guillermo's journey with Next. So I guess I'm trying to remember where the actual article is. I don't know if yeah, see, this is Guillermo's one, but I think the Nux team wrote something different. Nux Lab stewards and creators, stewards and see how they wrote it? Creators and stewards of Nitro and Nuxt are joining Vercel. So basically, Nux Labs is off doing its thing, building product, building a company. Daniel Rowe working on Nuxt itself, and then Puya working. I mean, obviously Daniel worked on Nitro a bit too, but like Puya is kind of on JS thing, building all those underlying pieces that power Nitro, which powers Nuxt. So this is like a very Linux mentality of every piece goes together to build the final tool. So there's like there's a few different pieces here. So as I said, Nuxt, the Vue framework, Nitro, this kind of underlying meta framework builder that has most of the core pieces, like the backend server, like the non-Vue parts, and then Nux Lab, the company. But who they get to bring in for this is obviously Daniel Rowe, Puya, and Anthony Fu is also working under them. So what's cool about Nux Lab is they're obviously a company, but he also funded open source initiatives. I mean, don't get me wrong, Nuxt benefited him, but these are all key people, both in the Vue ecosystem and also because of like, especially Puya's work through OnJS in the wider ecosystem in terms of people like H3 as a server framework is used now by several platforms. And Nitro, more importantly, is the basis that we chose to build Vinci on, which meant that Solid Start and TanStack Start were built on that, along with Analog, aside Nitro. So yes, when I saw this news, I did not see it coming, even if I probably should have. And I just kind of sat there and I'm like, huh, this means like we're all Vercel. And I know, like, who cares? But like I was just like, this is kind of like a weird Inception moment for me, right? It was like, huh, like Astro and Remix are outside of this. And then I put Quick City in here, and the Quick City guys are like, yeah, we're looking at Nitro. It's like, okay, so maybe Quick City is going to be in this list too. So Fresh, which is like very Dino specific. But like other than like Remix, which who knows? I mean, Remix Future is a whole other thing. I don't even know where that sits. But like it's kind of it's kind of like for me really like I added these guys later as I was thinking through it, but like I was like in my realm of things where I care about and I touch, everything but Astro is now coming out of Vercel. I mean, and Remix obviously too, but you get what I'm saying. And just because the creator of NJS is working there, right? And it was something to think about, right? Because I just said I don't know. When I wrote this, I wasn't sure what I was thinking, right? Because I mean, I've worked for Vercel competitor Netlify in the past. I've been involved with, you know, certain things like with the Cloudflare folks about, you know, equal play and all this kind of stuff around, you know, openness of Next and DAX and like the whole thing. I maybe don't always have the best feelings around Vercel, but on the other hand, they fund SvelteKit and Svelte in the same way I got funded in Netlify. I was super stoked when that news happened. So it's hard to kind of separate a lot of the feelings about like Next from Vercel and from like the whole thing for a lot of people. So it's like it was a lot. So that's all I was saying. But I feel like this sort of ended up firing off a kind of chain of things a little bit, and I wasn't sure, right? Because truth of the matter is, this is a net positive thing. Finding funding sources for people working on open source and important projects is the most dire thing that's in need of in a thing. And honestly, Vercel making this kind of investment is amazing. Like this is just continuing that message. I mean, as I said, 3 people working on Svelte and SvelteKit, 3 people working on Nuxt and Nuxt related stuff. That's a nice chunk. That's 6 heads working on stuff. Like I might have complaints about how in the past Next.js has been like almost too Vercel centric, but I don't have any concerns with that. With the Nuxt team, these guys have always been very open, and it hasn't impacted Svelte or SvelteKit at all. So, and I think actually, if I go back to my bookmarks here, wherever they are, Evan Yu said something along a similar lines. The main reason I'm optimistic about Vercel Nuxt acquisition is how they treat Svelte since acquiring it. If they do the same for Nuxt, which they claim they will, and I believe they will, then I think it's a net positive for Vue and Nuxt users. Completely. It's what's interesting to me is just that Next has generated a certain amount of bad will towards Vercel. And while this has not carried towards Svelte, and I don't think it includes the Nuxt, it was enough that when this happened, when you take something like you got to understand, NJS sort of represents and Beat, especially when you see the tie-ins. It's like the freedom fighters, you know, like if people wanted to make some crazy Star Wars level epic battle of fictional stuff that doesn't actually exist, if you look at it like that way, then people like, did the Empire just hire the leaders of the rebellion? Like, there's like this feeling where it's like people don't know how to, you know, what to think about it, and it kind of push things about. Like I have no doubt that Nuxt is going to be able to do and thrive under Vercel, but people are like, why did Vercel make this move, right? Like what is going on here? What's the thinking about it? And I'm not sure. You're gonna have to ask them. Where is it? What do you mean exactly? I don't know. I didn't see this coming, but it showed. This makes a lot of sense. Nitro represents the most popular agnostic way to build meta frameworks that can deploy anywhere. Having goodwill here towards Vercel ensures that portion will be secure for all frameworks. So, like, a way of you looking at this is, okay, it's not like the NJS stuff is going to stop working on everything, but if you're in a situation where, you know, there's goodwill and stuff and people are working and you're right next door to the other guy working on the platforms of Vercel, I mean, it makes sense that the Vercel integration will probably get better, which will actually benefit every single one of those frameworks up there. So that's positive. Could it be classic execution? Next use Express under the hood? No. Next is part of tool chain. Next is part of a chain of tools developed in Vercel and less widely used outside, including TurboPack and Vercel's platform integration. Nitro is built on Vite and has agnostic platform integration. While it's possible to consolidate, I'd be surprised that's the aim, at least near term. They've invested a lot in tools that work really well with their platform. This feels more like ensuring they get a bigger piece of the pie out of everything that isn't Next. Maybe Vercel indirectly becomes the preferred deployment platform for these other frameworks. The Nitro.js team is very dedicated to the open web, so I don't see any problem here, but there's always consequences of this sort of shuffling. What I mean is people are involved, narratives are involved. It's interesting. Like on the surface, mechanically what's happening is great. But people will talk, people will think, people will have opinions, and it will cause things. Because do you know what happened after I posted this? A bunch of people were telling me that Tanstack Start is not Nitro, blah, 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 blah. I would never touch a Vercel product. And it's just like, whoa. First of all, Tanstack Start is using Nitro. People are trying to prove me in the dependencies. And I'm like, look, they're saying they're moving away from it. I was like, hold on. I know what's going on with Tanstack Start. Like, whoa. And I realized, like, even suggesting or saying this kind of put this thing into, you know, out there. Tanner was getting enough stuff back that he actually had to clarify. Nitro is a valuable tool and we'll continue to support it as we build Adapter Start 1.0, but it'll not be a hard dependency. We have been working for a while towards Vite native to support any Vite plugin that uses Env API to configure build output. Yes, and people might have missed that. Yeah, they had Tanner and Tanstack were under Vercel funding for like 6 months. People might not remember that. They had a contract, and in such a way that Tanner got to build what he was building and doing his thing, and he just got like extra bonus referrals if he helped, you know, my understanding, I can't remember the exact details, but like, you know, people chose to deploy to Vercel or whatever, but it's, yeah. But like, I think people still don't understand the relation between these things. Vinci chose to use Nitro. I was talking with Nikhil. We talked it through. We just both decided Nitro was the best choice here. It wasn't the perfect choice, but it was the best choice in terms of what our use case was. In the process of devincifying, you know, getting rid of that, you still have to be able to deploy places. So Nitro is still there. Now, the thing is, there's always more nuance and context here. So I'm willing to get into that with you guys for a moment, but I think, you know, yeah. Now the best part comes, Nitro is going to just be plugin as well, right? Because the environment API allows for that, and that's kind of what we've all been waiting for. Basically, what happened was we, as usual, can never wait for people to build things. So, you know, Brandon Roberts had already built Nitro 2, like the older version, as a Vite plugin, and we use that as a base for Tanstack Start as a part of way of getting away from using Vinci. As I said, ironically, in my mind, Vinci is actually like Vinci just happened to choose Nitro and was constrained by no environment API. What Vinci actually does in that last little bit of layer is the part that Tanstack had to rewrite, but it's the part that I actually want back because it was actually an agnostic solution, where the Tanner solutions, some of them are agnostic, some of them are like Tanstack router specific. I think it's the wrong boundary for me. People have been trying to convince me that I need to change how I'm thinking on this, but after seeing how Solid Start works and conceptually, and understanding how the pieces, it's the right move for someone building a tool that works agnostic across all frameworks, but is the wrong tool for a framework that wants to be agnostic across all solutions. So, like, I'm very convinced that Vinci had the right boundaries. So there's some more work to be done there. But like, you have to understand, there's been friction, like slight friction between Nitro and us since the beginning, because we only really wanted part of the Nitro solution. And Nitro in some ways is too opinionated for what we want to do. I think Matthew Phillips, like, I never understood why you guys picked Nitro. It's kind of opinionated. but it also got out of our way a bit. Like we were able to sidestep it. So like my response to Tanner was, I mean, we talked about this privately, but I want to put this out so you guys understand it. I think it's very tempting, given new capabilities, to eliminate the middle layers. And by that, I mean the layer between solid start and beat, or TANSEC start and beat. I don't know they're completely eliminatable. It's just at minimum, the minimal solution is lighter than Nitro is today. What direction Nitro takes will probably be the bigger decider in its role moving forward. So in a sense, you see a Veet plugin as a way of lightening it, but Nitro is still kind of opinionated, maybe still so too much for what we actually care about. But let's go here. Ironically, even though Vinci has been the first casualty of the simplification, the unique parts of it are still the parts I'd most like to see in that middle layer. Vinci, in many cases, sat closer to Veet than Nitro. TANSEC ended up rebuilding a lot of it anyway on a better foundation, but also in many cases that cater specifically to TANSEC, like the router. It makes sense, but it's pushed SolidStart into taking back ownership of those pieces that I was trying to get rid of in the first place. Don't get me wrong, from an API surface perspective, Vinci was basically one-for-one replaceable with the Veet end API. And after all, it inspired it, right? But it is also the part that made the asset management, custom file-based routers, and router agnosticism possible in general. It could be rebased, definitely, as a straight Veet plugin, and that's the direction it should go. But the eventual solution is going to kind of look like what Vinci looked like in a way. But we're still a little away from, and we're still away from generalizing what that layer looks like, right? We haven't created the agnostic thing. Even with TANSEC Start, because they're still building a specific solution today for themselves, we haven't actually got back to that general solution. So I still think there's an opportunity for such a solution to exist after reshuffling. I'm just unclear if that solution's Nitro. Nitro as in might have very specific opinions in a way that we don't care about, or if it's just another TANSEC offering. Because truthfully, TANSEC already went and rebuilt a bunch of stuff, or something else. The tricky part here is understanding what's not being said, or understanding how this all fits in. Nitro will not be a hard dependency. What does that mean? Right. And I know that I'm getting away from the whole Vercel thing, but I feel like the only reason that we're talking about this at all right now is because a Vercel thing happened. If people weren't hammering about it, we're kind of get a cart ahead of the horse. It's like, what does Veet native mean? These are things that don't exist today. So while we can speak about this, and clearly there's a plan, as things sit right now, TANSEC, SolidStart, use Nitro. I'm not saying that, and there's no intention to remove Nitro, necessarily. But if it's an optional dependency, that means there must be another way to do what Nitro is doing. So whether that way is the better way or not is something that remains to be seen in the future. So I think this is why Tanner wants to get, but I feel like there's been a lot of pressure because of this Vercel thing, and I think it's kind of silly, honestly. Because the truth of the matter is the solutions don't exist yet. So the ecosystem has to come along. Now, what can that solution look like? Well, that's an interesting question, right? What does Veet native look like? Could we live in a world where we could eliminate most of these middle layers? Is there a world where you could just go straight to Veet and not need Nitro to produce the output you need for the specific platform? And I think the answer to that is maybe, right? The tricky part is you have to make it deployable on cloud providers with server rendering. Veet can make server builds, but how do you make that server build work for the provider, like Cloudflare or Netlify or all the specific ones? They have a lot in common. They're very similar, but I think it requires the provider to integrate directly with Veet, like Veet plugin Netlify, rather than, I think this is a win for everyone. Right now, we're in this weird zone where literally every meta framework has to have their own adapter, and either Nitro's doing it for you, Hat-Tip or something like that, or if it's a popular framework, like Next, and they don't make their own adapters. Netlify and Cloudflare have their own adapters for Next. I love it. At Netlify, we used to call it the Next runtime. It was too big to be called an adapter. It was so complicated to get it to run on the thing. And there's a Netlify team that basically manage that. Like, it was important enough for to have equivalent Next support to Vercel that there was basically, we had a kind of a Next team at Netlify in a sense. I mean, that wasn't their only responsibility, but you understand like that integration is not trivial, right? So you're in this kind of weird place where you either the providers trying to do work on frameworks, and they're not going to care about every framework, you know. If you're not in the top 3 or 4, like Cloudflare is this kind of case. Like, I don't know how their solid start thing is these days. Like, they were trying to run their own. Instead, we kind of take it on ourselves. We built our own adapters, and we're like, okay, we're going to manage this. I can't wait for Vercel. Like, I remember when I did that first edge streaming demo, I was just like, screw this, I'm just going to make it. I don't care. I think it's a lot of work for all parties involved. If we can get to a point where it's just a matter of a generic Vite plugin to deploy and dev. I think the key part people miss about Nitro, and it's partially because we didn't do it in Vinci, is the Nitro cares a lot about the dev environment, giving this consolidated thing, and it's based on that UnJS philosophy of that, like, lowest common denominator, like design with the same tools, deploy anywhere. So basically, and have the same dev and production experience in both places. Well, what would a Vite native solution look like? Well, let's think for a minute. What if Cloudflare provided a Vite plugin that worked in dev and prod? In that world, you could use Cloudflare specific stuff in dev. You could use durable objects. You could use those pieces, and not. The problem is when you built your app, you'd have to make that decision first. So it wouldn't be as easy to switch between providers per se if you use special features of those providers, but you would have a consistent dev environment, and arguably you could get rid of that middle layer. So I think that's, thinking out loud, where something like the Mbin API in Vite is enabling, and we're barely just scratching the surface of it. So I think that the design or the look of this middle layer changes. I think if we move to a world where adapters aren't the important part and people can just use provider-based plugins to handle dev and prod, then it really comes down to what kind of feature abilities you want to be exposed out of your functions or your workers or whatever you're doing. And if we get into that kind of world, ironically, it's the stuff like the generic file system routing, server functions. Like, some of those plugins are generic, some of those things, basically what Vinci provided, ironically. So it's like full circle. Vinci's had a big mess because it had to integrate a bunch of different tools and could be Vite native. But I think a Vinci built today on Vite would actually be in a much better place. Anyway, that's me just speculating on what this means. But it's a very different topic from where we started here, which is simply the fact that I'm pretty sure this Vercel stuff's just going to blow over, and I think people are taking it too seriously. Especially on Blue Sky. Twitter's tame. I was on Blue Sky, and people were like really arguing with me that Sol's or TANSTAck start has nothing to do with Vercel, and it's just like, man, who cares? Seriously, Nuxt is fine. Nitro is fine. The biggest, the parts that I'd be concerned about aren't the parts you're going to be able to see or get from a release announcement. It's like, is it possible that in this kind of situation, not enough funding or push gets pushed towards these frameworks? Like, you don't get to see that. Obviously, hiring the developers is the first step, but sometimes you need marketing, you need stuff. And if the company has different alignments and they don't push other resources, then yeah, maybe there might be a problem. Maybe Nuxt, but like clearly Nuxt Lab was at a point where they wanted to sell. And I know Void Zero was not a possibility. I'd be surprised if that conversation hadn't happened at some point. I don't think it's the right play for where Void Zero is right now anyways, right? But I think that, like, essentially this is a very strong move for the open source in terms of development. If there's implications in terms of, how this impacts future growth of these projects, I don't know if we've seen it in Svelte. We can't tell because we haven't seen the other reality, right? Svelte has grown during that time period with Vercel, with or without its help. And the thing is, if you look at it from the perspective of these developers, like Rich Harris, I mean, he was working at the newspaper and doing some Svelte work. Having paid resources is a plus in itself. That's already increased his capability, what he can do, right? And what's capable with the framework. So like I think that, like, you could always argue that maybe in these positions, the companies aren't incentivized to do more for the frameworks. And I could even arguably say that's true of Solid, Netlify or Sentry. Like how much are they actually going to push Solid out there? I don't know. Remains to be seen. In general, just the first step of having developers and resources have that ability to work on thing is not a guaranteed thing in the current economy and where we're at. So I mean, this is just good. The worst thing that could have happened is if Nux Labs was, perhaps having trouble or couldn't get acquired and things and then suddenly no one's funding Nux. That would be terrible. This is great by comparison. So, I mean, I don't know the situations. I don't know the strategic pieces of this, but like clearly at minimum, this is as good as the status quo has been going. Is it as good as other options? Who knows? But it's not really up for us to make a decision on. Okay. Sounds like Tanner wants to build that smaller little layer. Yeah. Maybe he will give me a collection of Vite plugins that are basically the new Vinci. He's not incentivized to do the stuff that he already has with Router, though. So we'll see. But maybe that's where it is. Yeah, Netlify and Cloudflare Edge consolidate on Open Next. Right. Anyways, I'm just getting there. Twitter wasn't that tame, at least from the Nux perspective. Yeah, I think it's just the fact that like Blue Sky is a little bit more on the openness side. Yeah, it's interesting. Like it was like it's like the opposite side of the thing. Like on one side, Nux is getting crap from Vercel, the Vercel stuff, which I expect they would get more on. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. These guys just getting worse. If it wasn't for people in Marcus and Richhurst, I would never go there. Yeah. Oh, Evan explained why the Void Zero thing. Okay, cool. Let's see if I can just quickly grab that. Sorry, I'm just catching up with the chat. Oh, come on. Sometimes the chat when I switch and I haven't been on the window doesn't update right away. Come on, why am I not seeing it? There it is. Void Zero in itself is an early stage startup, and even if we have the capital, it wouldn't make sense for us yet. Okay, that's exactly, the official word. I mean, in a lot of ways, you see that could make sense, but it's also, I think it's an interesting thing. Like, Nuxt is a specific, like Void Zero is kind of beat. Nux is a specific framework. It's interesting. Nitro is an interesting. I think Nitro would be the more interesting play for Void Zero. And I recently joined another kind of Discord chat where it's like Evan and Tanner, myself, like it's Nitro, Vite, and the TanStack Solid Start people kind of working together on kind of coming talking about how to split up the stuff in the middle layer. I think the interesting thing is I don't know in a Vite Emb world, like does it just take Vite getting a couple more features to make most of the reason we use Nitro disappear? Do you know what I mean? Like I think stuff is shuffling around rapidly at this point, which is why I was kind of annoyed at like all the conversation going down, because like I get Vercel thing and pushed it, but like let's not push the horse before it's there. Like in the same way I don't usually show or case or talk about like how great something is until I have a demo showing it. Like I believe in having the thing in hand before you make the statement. Yeah. Oh, Excel funds both Vercel and Void Zero. Yeah. So it isn't red versus blue. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. People kind of do. Yeah. There we go. Anfu is working on for Vercel while having contract Void Zero to work on Vite DevTools now. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just think that like this is an example of stuff getting overblown. People have liked because of the problem is I feel like maybe the Vue community got blindsided. They didn't. I don't think you guys maybe realize just how hostile the React ecosystem environment has gotten. And with Remix stepping out, things have gotten even more like there's some weird thing that's, as I said, not even completely real, like where people have this perception on how like there's good guys and bad guys. As I said, it's almost like we have like the Star Wars playing out, or like the Foundation, like some big empire versus the. So it's like it's not even React has gone and Vercel and Next have gone in such a weird place that there's a certain people just looking for some kind of narrative, and it's really unfortunate because where it gets to me is when it pushes talk and about technology based stuff that has that like without the grounding to actually the technology thing. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. Let's just not like go in and be like let's not get pushed so much into this kind of politics of things. If this is the state of Twitter and Blue Sky, I don't even want to look at HackerOne. Yeah, oh god, I don't know. Or Reddit. Reddit would be the worst. I tweeted this. Check on. I'm going to use Nux because I hate Vercel people in your life. They are having a pretty hard day today. Yeah, because there is like a political alignment thing. There are people like, oh, at least what got me to say the statement, it was someone was like, at least I can still use TanStack start. And I'm like, nope. Like I was just trying, like I started this whole thing because I was trying to like, like my part of it was just because I'm trying to be like, look, like everybody, like it's kind of like that thing. I think Theo probably did this. I watched a bit of his video where he's talking about like companies fund pieces of open source that are used by everyone. I think this is more than that. I think this is like, it's not just like the one obscure thing, that's way down in the stack. I think that like, even though Nitro is kind of under the hood, I think there is like, I think it's a little bit more in your face than that. But on the other hand, like, yeah, everything is everything, like there's, it's kind of sad. I had the draft, but it's his to publish. Did he ever release it? If he released it, that's a different thing, but I'm not. Oh, when did he publish it? Okay. Yeah, I didn't see that one. I guess it was about a month ago when I was away. Is the video available anyway? I'll check it out in the future. I'm wrapping up the stream now. We have gone way too long. We're over 6 hours. This is probably, sorry, Nikhil, we beat the longest stream ever probably. I guess we'll find out when it's done. But he was very proud to be the longest stream. I'm so done. I gotta go. Yeah. This stuff will all blow over. I do think there's some really cool development going on though, so I look forward to that, I guess. As for everyone else, have a great weekend. All right.